Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Montgomery County Council. We're beginning our hearings with Agenda Item 6. This is a public hearing on Bill 4520, Community Policing Data. This bill would require the Montgomery County Police Department, MCPD, to make certain reports, require the MCPD to post certain data sets on Data Montgomery, and generally amend the law governing policing. Public Safety Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, January 21st, 2021. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the Council's consideration should do so before the close of business on January 15th. Each individual will have 2 minutes to speak. Individuals will be alerted as they approach their 2 minutes and may be disconnected. Also, there may be technical glitches during the public hearing that need to be addressed by our staff, so thanks in advance for your patience. Ms. Kennedy, could you please introduce the speakers for this public hearing?
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Yes, we have 4 speakers for this public hearing, and the first will be Chief Marcus Jones. Chief Jones, you may start your video and begin your testimony. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Council President Hooker and council members. It is a pleasure for me to appear on behalf of County Executive Mark Elridge in support of Bill 4520. The County Executive is in support of enhancing transparency of the Police Department through the collection and reporting of data for race and ethnicity regarding police interactions with the public. The Police Department is in the process of purchasing a new records management system, RMS, which will maintain much of the data requests made in this bill. The new RMS is currently in the procurement process and should be operational by the year 2022. There are some data requests made in this bill that are not owned by the police department, such as traffic stop data, which is maintained by the Maryland State Police. CRIMS data, also known which carries physical arrest, is maintained by the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and is not currently available to MCPD. Efforts are underway to get this data to MCPD. It will take the integration of CRIMS and a modern RMS system to provide the many data streams envisioned. In the interim, the police department will look at manually collecting and reporting citation data. There are conditional concerns and considerations that are too lengthy to describe during this public hearing that I have included in my written testimony and will elaborate on during committee work sessions. Based upon the plan for the new RMS and the requested new data collection points for this legislation, it is recommended that these mandates be included in the new RMS where it is applicable, and MCPD will work with other agencies such as Maryland State Police to develop additional broader scale systems to capture the desired data. Otherwise, it will be extremely costly and duplicative to develop a separate system now, train the department personnel, and implement in the short run. I look forward to further discussions on this matter in committee sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Jones. Our next speaker is Jerry Kickinson. Mr. Kickinson, you may begin your video and your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Kickinson. I live in District 4, and I am testifying in support of Bill 4520 on behalf of Jews United for Justice, which advances economic, racial, and social justice in Montgomery County by educating and mobilizing our local Jewish community to action. Our Torah teaches that it was all the people who accepted Torah at Mount Sinai. So too, we believe that all the people in our county have the right to help shape our county's laws and policies. Yet how can we hold police officers accountable for actions that are not even recorded in MCPD data? We appreciate the Council's decision to implement the recommendations of the Office of Legislative Oversight regarding the collection of data on various policing practices, and we thank Councilmember Joanna for his leadership on this bill. We especially support the bill's specification that data collection should allow the Council and the public to track the racial and ethnic identity of those impacted by policing practices in Montgomery County. As written, the bill would dramatically improve MCPD data collection and reporting practices. Based on our experience analyzing data already published by MCPD, we recommend the Council consider 2 enhancements to even further advance the ability to detect and address disparities. First, include the outcome of the interaction. While benchmark measures, for example, how often different races are stopped, can demonstrate disproportionate impacts, they cannot on their own demonstrate bias. Adding outcome measures, for example, did a search actually result in contraband being found, provides the additional data needed to detect bias. Second, include the police district of the officer involved in the incident. This would allow a drill down to determine if countywide trends apply across MCPD or are concentrated in certain districts. Finally, JFJ also supports the amendments offered by our partners, including Silver Spring Justice Coalition and Tacoma Park Mobilization. And we look forward to continuing the conversation about what should be included in this bill as you conduct the work sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kickinson. Our next speaker is Joanna Silver. Ms. Silver, you may begin your video and your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Joanna Silver, and I am testifying in support of Bill 4520 on behalf of Tacoma Park Mobilization and the Silver Spring Justice Coalition. I am also an active leader with Jews United for Justice, which is offering separate testimony in support of this bill. We appreciate the Council's decision to implement the recommendations of the Office of Legislative Oversight regarding the collection of data on various policing practices. We particularly appreciate the bill's insistence that data collection allow the Council and the public to track the racial and ethnic identity of those impacted by policing in our county. While the Council is doing the important work of requiring data on policing practices, we ask it to consider going beyond what is currently in the bill. I'd like to mention a few examples here, in addition to those that were included in JUFJ's testimony. We hope that you will be open to sitting down with community members to discuss these and other amendments before finalizing this bill. First, while the bill requires data on the number of calls for service involving mental health issues, it should also include data regarding the results of these calls. For example, who was dispatched, was the subject arrested and for what, and was force used. Second, in my work on the County Executive's Task Force on Reimagining Public Safety, I learned that the MCPD does not require any record of when an officer draws his or her service weapon, even if it is to point it at a member of the public. This is an incredibly important data point that other jurisdictions require collection on, and we should too, both to track the racial disparities in this practice and to decrease its frequency. Third, after the incident last year in which several young Black men were detained and harassed by the police at the McDonald's in White Oak, we talked about the need to collect data on the issuance of stay-away notices by the police and on the related practice of private businesses empowering our police to act as their agents in enforcing their property rights under our trespass law. This bill should include data related to these practices as well. Right now, it only refers to the issuance of trespass citations. Thank you again. Thank you so much for this bill, and we look forward to working with you on this in the future.
Thank you for your time. Our next speaker is Stacy Matthews. Ms. Matthews, you may begin your video and your testimony. You need to unmute, please. There you go.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing. My name is Stacy Matthews, and I grew up on the fringes of Montgomery County. I lived in Northwest Park Apartments from the age of 8 until high school, and in the Langley Park, Tacoma area now. As a member of the community who has seen from my own experiences and from those of my peers that justice involvement is overwhelmingly impacting the Black and African American community and the Latinx community, and wanting to understand, from the position of being a data analyst myself, how this has impacted our community. We cannot do this unless we have access to data, and not simply the number of stops, but really collecting the type of information that's outlined in this bill. We cannot understand the breadth and nature of the issue that is racism, the systemic racism within law enforcement, and how that is present in Montgomery County unless we're able to understand who is being stopped, where they're being stopped, how they're being handled, what force is being used, and what was the outcome. I implore you to pass Bill 45 and continue to make greater steps in moving toward understanding our community, our police, and how we can all work together.
Thank you very much. That wraps up the speakers for this public hearing.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Agenda item number 7. This is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget for the Community Engagement Cluster Support for COVID-19 Response in the amount of $1,250,000 for winterization for streeteries. Action is immediately scheduled following this public hearing. Ms. Kennedy, I believe there are no speakers for this public hearing.
Oh, we do have speakers for this public hearing. Our first speaker will be Jeru Bande. Hi, Jeru. You may start your video and begin your testimony.
Hello, Susan. I don't think I signed up to speak on this.
Oh, okay. I just got a little message that you did. So, but
I'm sorry.
thank you anyway, Jeru. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Hannah Henn.
Ms. Kennedy, these are executive staff available for questions that I just sent to Ms. Wright. I do not believe they signed up for the hearing, just so you know.
Thank you very much. We do have Hannah Henn, however, to speak, I believe. Is that correct or not?
Again, I believe the memo that came out saying no public speeches for this is correct. The executive staff requested to be available if questions were asked during this, and all the executive staff that got added recently were available just for questions. They did not sign up for speaking.
Okay, I just had some different information. Thank you so much for clarifying that. That's correct, Mr. President. No speakers.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy.
So I'm sorry, this is Rick Callahan. Is this for the COVID-19 response? The agencies? I thought this was...
This is for the winterization for streeteries.
Oh, okay, sorry, wrong one.
That's okay. Thank you.
Signed up for agenda item number 10, Mr. Callahan. We're not there yet.
All right, sorry, thank you.
Thank you, no worries. It's confusing to many of us. Okay, agenda item 7. We received a position and a letter from the county executive's office and the regional service directors late yesterday. Councilmember Friedson responded. I wanted to call on him to see if he wanted to share his suggestion.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You know, in light of the county executive's comments on this and some of the concerns that have been raised and the interest of council members of ensuring that we move forward with this and provide the opportunities for communities throughout the county and not just one particular community or another. 2 suggested amendments to this proposal. One is to move the funding from CARES Act federal funding to general fund reserves to provide for greater flexibility to implement these countywide. And number 2, to add in language, which we believe already would have been allowed, but to make it more clear to provide flexibility for municipalities who have participated. So currently it allows for anything that the county has been involved in related to a streetery, and this would allow for anything the county has been involved in or a municipality within the county would be involved in. I think this would provide the flexibility that has been requested, allow us to move forward if for whatever reason certain of these efforts are not able to move forward. It would be no harm to the county because the money would just remain in general fund reserves. So there really would be no risk here. The only thing we would be doing is continuing something that has worked really well, that has been a real benefit to residents and to businesses, a real positive at a time when there hasn't been a lot of it, and will provide the financial flexibility as requested. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz?
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with Councilmember Friedson. I also believe that, and I'm trying to pull it up and I couldn't, but I believe it says in there that it would be in the right-of-way for county right-of-way. And I don't know why we would only limit it to county right-of-way. We certainly should limit it to the municipal owned areas. If it was on privately owned property and there's more than one organization, if it was in a strip shopping center and it's on their privately owned property, why wouldn't we want to consider that? Or if it's on a state highway right-of-way, why that wouldn't be considered? So that's my questions and my point.
Agreed. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you so much. I agree with Councilmember Friedsen's proposal, as I stated via email. I think this is another one of those circumstances where it's connected to the conversation we had previously today, because we do have staff in the administration, such as our business navigators, of course, the regional services directors, and other people who I know we've provided resources in order to support our small businesses. So it was a bit of a surprise to me that the response that we got back via letter was that there didn't seem to be a feeling that, for example, this could be managed through the regional services director, or along with some additional support. Of course, I understand they don't have a lot of staff, but we do have other staff in the administration that is specifically there to provide support to businesses. And I hope that as we move forward, again, that this conversation about how we are utilizing existing staff or redeploying, et cetera, is addressed, because all we're trying to do here is just respond to, this great need that exists out there. I like the flexibility in language, because some areas may not have streeteries, but they might have restaurants that would like to take advantage of this. And even though we've also appropriated other money for it, obviously that has not been enough. So I do like that language, and again, just hope that we're able to figure out how to best deploy and leverage the resources, the human capital resources that we have in the administration to manage something like this, which is really not that complicated, obviously. So hope that going forward we will be able to do that. But I'd like to second Councilmember Friedsen's proposal, and I did see that he raised his hand. I think he wanted to respond to Councilmember Katz's question. So I don't know, Mr. President, if you'd like to recognize Councilmember Friedsen.
He's next, Councilmember Friedsen.
Yeah, thank you. I was just hoping that maybe council staff, if Gene Smith could respond. I think there's some clarifications on Councilmember Katz's questions and comments related to the right-of-way.
Right, Mr. Smith.
Sure. So the resolution requires that the streetery exist in the county right away or through the county partnership collaboration, and then based on Mr. Friedsen's recommendation, also that would be municipal partnership. And so even if it's not in the county right away, as long as the county or a municipality is partnered to create a streetery, they would also qualify under this. Does that answer your question, Mr. Katz?
It absolutely does, and that's exactly what I was hoping for. Thanks.
Okay, Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Mr. Smith answered my question, but so if restaurants want to do this, I was hung up on the word partnership, and so you've just said that would extend to municipalities as well. And so just so we all understand the process, and so that our small restaurants who are not affiliated with any of the chambers or with any other larger organization, would they need to reach out to either a municipality or the county in advance of participating in this program or in anticipation of getting any funds to support it? Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Smith, let me just stay on that point for a minute. So two examples I can think of. One is a small craft brewery in downtown Silver Spring that wanted to open. At one point, they were offered to and decided not to open spaced dining area in the right-of-way of State Highway Administration on George Avenue. They considered then pivoting and having some additional dining on private property next to their building where they rent space. That would not be covered. That would not be eligible under these, right?
That is correct. As noted in the packet, there's not a grant program here. The regional service center directors, and that's the partnership that we're talking about here, I believe, based on the author's request, is to administer the funding. So the partnership would be done through the regional service centers based on the best way to apply this in each district. And so I would suggest the small craft brewery would need to work with the regional service center director in Silver Spring to best figure out how to make that work.
Okay, so but then just to that point, private property would be eligible if it's with the approval of the regional service director.
Correct. If it's in partnership with the county to create that streetery.
Right.
I think we have a couple of those. Councilmember Katz.
Yeah, and the point was just made, if it's in partnership. I mean, this is not for a single business. If I'm reading this correctly, it would be in partnership. So it would be allowed if there would be others that could also be involved in that.
Part of a strategy.
Yeah.
Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. I apologize. I just joined the conversation a little bit late. Can you talk a little bit about how it meshes with the 3R program if you haven't already? Councilmember Friedson, I suppose I would ask that too, or council staff.
Yeah, Mr. Smith, you want to chime in?
It was, well, actually, I can't say whether it would mesh well with or not well with the 3R program. That question hasn't been asked. I mean, the 3R program was for specific businesses through the MCDC or Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. This one was proposed to focus through the regional service centers directors and the regional service centers to work with collaboration that the county is already doing for streeteries, so not through what MCDC is doing. I think that's the best I can respond. Maybe Mr. Friedson has additional thoughts on that.
If it pleases the council president, happy to.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith. That's right. The 3R program at one point was considering looking at this. I think that was part of the genesis of it, since you were actively involved in that, Councilmember Reamer, with the MCEDC. It has since pivoted from that, and now they're both launched the grant program, which is now closed. We fully funded that program to make sure that everybody was able to access the funds. And then they are continuing to look at alternative retail solutions, including, digitizing, providing for opportunities for carry out and pickup, for going online, et cetera. So that program itself has pivoted towards a different thought process and a different model, different focus. So it wouldn't be directly connected to that, but I think it would be complementary to it. This would be run through the regional services centers. As was said earlier, the idea of the regional services centers is they are the county executive branch staff that are in closest touch with the communities, with local businesses. They are the problem solvers in the street, many of them including Giroux in Burtonsville, who is available here, as we heard, not to speak, but he's worked, for instance, with strip centers, strip malls, to have multiple businesses take up parking spaces for multiple businesses, et cetera. That would be, an example of different activities. The point here is that every community has done this differently. They've all done different aspects of this. We wanted to provide the ultimate level of flexibility to provide the executive branch with the ability to move forward with these opportunities. And so that's what the amended version that I moved and Councilmember Navarro seconded would allow for us to be able to pursue.
All right. I mean, I think this is an important area for us to be spending money. Anything that we can do to help these businesses make it through here, and certainly support it. I was just interested because, MCEDC had been able to really effectively get funding out and administer these programs, and was interested if this had been designed, to leverage any of that, or if you feel like it's a separate pathway. I'm not saying which way it should be, one way or the other, but sounds like I'm sure they'll be in touch with one another, because the 3R program had partnered with the regional directors to identify how to build that program on the ground there. But okay, thanks.
Councilmember Katz.
Yeah, just to be clear, so everything would be coordinated through the regional services centers. But for instance, when you're saying municipal partners, with the municipal partners, they could use their land, but they too would have to go through the regional services centers. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Glass, do you have another question?
Yeah, I do. Clearly the regional services centers are our eyes and ears on the ground, and those directors know their communities intimately well. Because there are 5 of them, I'm wondering if there is any plan. How will these funds be dispersed? And, if there is some parameter for it, and I harken back to when we had the FEG conversation, which many, many months ago, and we carved out for small businesses and restaurant and retail. And so my general question here, which I've already asked, but we'll reframe it. I just want to make sure they're equally dispersed throughout the county as an at-large member, wanting to make sure that all restaurateurs are able to participate. And so has any thought been given to that, how it's dispersed?
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, it's up to the executive branch to be able to do it. As a district council member, I went out of my way to make sure that every district had the opportunity to access these funds. It was based on what the cost would be to be able to do this in Bethesda, but provides the opportunity and flexibility for the same amount in other jurisdictions throughout the county. So there's ultimate flexibility here. The intention is that each receive an equitable amount of funding, and that funding have the flexibility to be able to suit the specific needs of that community, which is really the whole purpose of the regional service center model for the county. So appreciate the point. That was the intention of the way that this was put together. The amount and the flexibility was specifically done with the purpose of regional equity and flexibility in mind.
And I appreciate your flexibility in the proposal when learning that, it was originally a little too narrowly focused, and then the executive helped expand it so it could be used throughout the county. Very good stuff, and I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Councilmember Katz.
Yeah, I swear, I believe this is my last question, but it's caused a lot of good, exciting discussion for me, for people emailing me or texting me. So how would insurance be handled on this? If it's not in county right of way, who would insure it?
I cannot answer that question.
Wouldn't it be the private property owner?
Well, but if it's the municipal, is that what we would have to do? Is there a blanket policy?
Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, my assumption is, we're providing funding for a specific purpose here. We'd be funding to rent tents, for instance, or rent heaters, for instance, but, the standard liability would still remain. The business that's providing, the tents based on the agreement and the indemnification clauses, the property owner, whether it's state property on state right of way or county property on county right of way or municipal property or private property. Right. I don't think this would have a bearing on the impact in terms of what the liability would be.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, there's no other comments. We have a motion from Councilmember Friedson and a second from Councilmember Navarro. All those in favor of this special appropriation, please raise your hand. Terrific. That is unanimous. We're on to item 8. This is a public hearing on expedited Bill 4820, Human Rights and Civil Liberties, Building Maintenance Worker Minimum Work Week effective date. This bill would delay the effective date of Chapter 25 Laws of Montgomery County 2019. Action will be taken during the legislative sessions call of bills for final reading later this afternoon. Ms. Kennedy, I understand we have one speaker for this hearing?
That's correct. The only speaker we have is Nicola Whiteman. And Ms. Whiteman, if you could please turn on your video and begin your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am pleased to testify today and to really join with SEIU in supporting Bill 48-20, which, as the Council President noted, will delay the effective date of the minimum workweek law from January 1st, 2021 to January 1st, 2022. As noted in our joint letter, the Act is scheduled to take effect this January amidst an ongoing global pandemic and recession, which continues to wreak havoc on the local and state economies. Across the county are near empty office buildings as most employees continue to work from home. The ongoing economic fallout continues to have a devastating impact on our industry. Many commercial tenants continue to struggle to pay rent, and we expect little change to occupancy levels and for telecommuting to continue well into 2021. A combination of these and other factors has resulted in job losses to date in the janitorial industry covered by the Act. For example, one AOBA member cleaning company noted that they have lost over 200 jobs to date in the county alone. And I believe that number was about 1,000 in their footprint. And again, this is in the period covered by the pandemic. We believe that a delayed effective date will help minimize further losses as we collectively work to stabilize our economy and provide much needed support to our residents and workers. AOBA will continue to work with the county and other stakeholders to focus our collective efforts on stabilizing the economy. We are one community. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Megan.
Thank you very much. That wraps up the speakers for this public hearing, Mr. President.
Thank you. Okay, we're on to agenda item 9. This is a public hearing on a resolution to establish utilization premium payments for public school improvements. Action is also scheduled later in this meeting. Ms. Kennedy, do we have a speaker for this hearing?
We do not.
Okay.
I think we do.
I think we have one.
I don't see you on the list. Okay, I'm sorry. Laura Stewart, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Hucker and council members. My name is Laura Stewart, MCC-PTA Vice President of Advocacy. I'm here speaking for our Subdivision Staging Policy Subcommittee. We strongly support the resolution to establish utilization premium payment rates for public school improvements. I want to thank you for the hard work it took to produce this final product, which is part of the new growth and infrastructure policy. I think we can all agree that moratoria did not fix the realities that kids are experiencing in their overcrowded schools. This payment helps us replace moratoria with more school construction funding. We have not been keeping up with our facility needs, and this payment will help cover our large capacity needs while freeing up other funds for our large maintenance backlog. This is more important than ever, considering the extra strain that our facilities will be under when we reopen in the COVID-19 environment. However, I'm worried that we haven't reached CIP funding goals due to the new progressive recordation tax piece being delayed until spring. The utilization premium payment will only fulfill capacity needs if we also cover turnover impacts with the recordation tax proposal. I strongly urge you to look for a way to increase school construction funding in a way that will take advantage of the anticipated new state funding through the Built to Learn Act. I also want to take a minute to thank you for funding the South Lake project and the HVAC request this year. Passing this resolution and the progressive recordation tax later this spring, along with the appropriate state funding, will help our county actually provide us with the necessary resources to complete long overdue projects like Poolsville High School, Eastern Middle School, and Twin Brook Elementary School renovations. Thank you again for all your work in the new on the new growth and infrastructure policy, taking time to hear from parents and education advocates, and for supporting Montgomery County schools, one of the most important assets to our county. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stewart. That wraps up the speakers for this public hearing, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. We are moving on to agenda item 10. This is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget for the Department of Health and Human Services in the amount of $225,095 for COVID response to organizations serving people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Action is also scheduled later in this meeting. Ms. Kennedy, do we have any speakers for this item?
Yes, we have Rick Callahan. Mr. Callahan, you may begin your video and your testimony. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. That's my turn now. Sorry for jumping in earlier. I apologize for that. So, thank you for the opportunity to speak today on the special appropriations of the COVID response to agencies supporting people with disabilities. My name is Rick Callahan. I'm the Executive Director of Compass and co-chair of Interact, representing over 30 DD providers in support of this special appropriations. I want to thank the County Council, Linda McMillan, Dr. Kroll, Adil, Camadora, Dr. Greenberg is a local physician, and all the PCC staff for what they provide in the DD community. I cannot imagine where the people we support, their families, our awesome DSPs, and the DD providers would be without your support. COVID-19 has been devastating for all the communities and has been especially tragic for people with disabilities and their families. The physical and emotional strain that is occurring in our field can be overwhelming. The people we support, their families, and the DSPs are all very tired. We need our toolbox to be full and readily available to combat this next wave. PCC support is one of those essential tools. They, like our DSPs, are essential to our success. Some of the essential services that PCC contract will provide are vaccination deployment, training to service providers and the DSPs, infection control consultant services, collaborative learning environment. This is already in place. Many of the providers are in motion with a lot of the services that are already provided. We're just looking for the continuation of that service through the end of the fiscal year. So we urge the council to fully fund the PCC contract through the end of the fiscal year. And so again, I want to thank everybody for all the support. It's just amazing what Montgomery County does for their citizens. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. That wraps up the speakers for this public hearing, Mr. President. You're muted.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Just speaking to my staff here. So agenda item 10.5 is next. This is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget in the amount of $801,912.50 for the Board of Elections Center for Tech and Civic Life. Action is also scheduled immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
No, there are no speakers.
There are no speakers.
I think you skipped the action on the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. President, 10.5 was supposed to be action as well. Or 10, sorry.
10 was action.
10, the notes I had said action was scheduled during the meeting, but if we're taking action now, that's fine. Then we need a motion.
So moved.
Councilmember Rice moves and Council Vice President Albernoa seconds. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Bob, are we good?
Yes, I think you're good. You're ready for 10.5, which also I think has action.
Yes. Okay. 10.5, it does say scheduled immediately following this hearing. We need a motion for this appropriation as well.
So moved.
Councilmember Navarro moves. Councilmember Katz seconds. All those in favor of this appropriation, please raise your hand. Terrific. That is also unanimous. Okay, on to agenda item 10.6. This is a public hearing for a special appropriation for the FY21 operating budget for the Montgomery County Government Federal Coronavirus Relief Fund, NDA, in the amount of $9,934,156 and amendment to Resolution 19-498, special appropriation to fiscal year 2020 operating budget, Montgomery County Government Federal Coronavirus Relief Fund. Action is immediately scheduled following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, are there any speakers for this hearing?
No, there is not.
On 10.6?
She is not here.
Great. Verifying that. Okay. So we need a motion in favor of this appropriation. Councilmember Rice moves. Councilmember Katz seconds. All those in favor of this special appropriation, please signify by raising your hand.
Sorry, I requested to speak, Council President.
Oh, beg your pardon.
That's okay.
Council Member Friedson.
Yeah, I'll be very brief here. I spoke quite a bit previously on the other two related items earlier today. I think it highlights the point. This is case in point right here. There are $9 million in appropriations that were designated by the county council to support vulnerable residents and struggling businesses, including the targeted responses to communities of color, including support for the most vulnerable residents, including school-age childcare, a host of different programs, including business support for unspent funds not expected to be able to be spent in reopening grants. Rather than redirecting these funds towards the vulnerable residents they were intending to help or the struggling businesses they were intending to help, the clock is basically run out, and now the executive branch is requesting to backfill it into general operating funds. And one of the main areas of this, the vast majority of it, is differential pay. As I mentioned earlier, the projections currently are $54 million of the $64.4 million available will all go to differential pay. We still have a lot of the 25% local match I just don't think it's appropriate. On October the 13th, I very specifically asked the Chief Administrative Officer, is there any plan or is there any possibility where funds allocated by the County Council would be redirected and used for differential pay? I was emphatically told no. You were emphatically told no. The public was emphatically told no. And this is a proposal with an emphatic yes. That's exactly what this proposal does. I don't think that it is appropriate. I think it not only sends the wrong message to residents, I think it's not the right thing to do. And so I will respectfully be voting against this proposal. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Raymer.
Thank you. Well, my colleague's comments is an interesting one because I think, in a sense, I agree with him. You know, I'm deeply frustrated that we're having to devote CRF funding for an expenditure that we never approved. You know, had we had the discussion about whether we would approve it, you know, I don't know how that would have gone exactly, and I think we would have said that more of the money we got from the federal programming should have gone for other critical needs, and we would have, you know, might have been able to move it faster with fewer restrictions on the funding. You know, think about some of the restrictions we put on the rental assistance, for example, made it a lot harder to find tenants. You know, we basically closed off half the county to some of the funded programs. You know, there was a lot of ways in which we were acting on the basis of funding that might have been more limited than it actually was. But we didn't know. And at the end of the day, you know, we didn't burn through that funding quickly enough so that we could do another round. So now we are finding that we're having to kind of reallocate funding at the end, and it's not going to go into more of those services. You know, it'll be going into the differential. I think, if I understand it correctly, that's the essential reality. The problem is the differential doesn't change either way. And so if I'm understanding correctly, you know, if we didn't approve this, it would just mean that we wouldn't spend federal dollars, we'd have to spend our local dollars on the differential. So it's not really a question of whether we're voting to approve differential or we're really endorsing, you know, an allocation of the federal funding in a way that we might not necessarily support. It's a starker choice of there's nothing we can, you know, we're not able to change that at this time. It's really a question of, are we going to expend all of our federal funding or not? And if we don't, then we're going to have to use local funding for this differential. Am I describing that right, council staff?
Yes. Oops. Hi, Marlene Michelson here. So what is happening in this is that we're just trying to take the remaining 9.9 million that is left. And the way the resolution has been redrafted, it gives the executive direction to try and spend it on what the council has been identifying as its priorities. So the first intent is to have the funding used for food distribution, eviction, homelessness, the FEG program, early care, and the programs targeted to our Latino and African American communities. And that is the direction. But if the money can't be spent there, the money could be used for any program previously approved by the council. And that would include a variety of things, including pay differential. But it is, as you asked, it is from money that has already been spent. And so either it will be paid for by the CRF dollars, if they're available, or it'll be paid for the general fund. And I think going forward, prospectively, the council certainly may want to have a lot of discussions about what you want to do in terms of pay differential. But in this particular resolution, it is for money that has been spent and will be spent prior to December 31st.
And the only way, if we really wanted to fully expend the funding on those other community needs first, how is that indicated? And what is possible as far as how much money could be expended, in the child care grants or the other purposes that you've mentioned in this, and when does it have to be expended by again?
By the end of this calendar year, so there's only a short amount of time left. We have been trying to work with executive staff to explore every opportunity, and some of the details of the resolution actually sort of broaden within the programs you've already approved and are supportive of, have little indications of how to sort of broaden the language to make sure that as much possible money can go out the door on those programs. And we'll make every effort, but I also have to be realistic that there's just a couple of weeks left. And so if at the end, right at the end of December, they've not been successful with these programs, it was our intent to make sure that the money could be spent and that all of the CRF dollars could be used, which is why we have a provision at the end of the resolution that provides this flexibility if they can't direct it to these programs.
Is there language that says what the priority should be?
Yes, it's listed on, if you want to look at the packet on page 2 of the resolution, it says the $9.9 million in funds are limited to the following council priority uses. And they are the uses that I just mentioned. But then at the end, there's another provision that says if you cannot use it on these priority programs, here are some, you can use it on something else approved by the council. And I want to emphasize that because in the draft of the resolution that had previously been sent over by the executive, it expanded the allowable uses, but some council members were concerned with that expansion. So there is no expansion here for any use not previously approved by the council.
So it says if you cannot expend it on these, so they must try to expend it on all those priorities first. Correct. And if it cannot be expended on those priorities, then it can be used for other things that council has spent funding on.
Correct.
And okay, thanks.
Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. So, obviously when this was transmitted to us, I expressed my concern. I was taken aback by the notion that these organizations or these efforts, somehow they couldn't spend this money, especially because at least within the Latino COVID-19 initiative, I know personally that they are in need of a lot of different resources, and the need is just so great. And actually, when we decided to approve some of these, all of these particular initiatives, we were on record saying that most likely we needed to come back because this wasn't going to be enough. So that's why it was really puzzling to me. I know that, Proyecto Salud, for example, I know they were in need of hiring more people to staff the phone lines to give the test results to folks. I know that in terms of some of the hubs, they're still in need for particular kinds of supplies, which they're asking community to donate. And so it was just very strange. And I appreciate the fact, Ms. Michelson, that you did work to, amend the language somewhat. But I just, again, feel totally at a loss for understanding what is the process through which it was determined that these initiatives could not spend this money, given the fact that the need is just so extraordinary, intense. Those really stood out for me. And so I still have had a hard time reconciling that. I know that now the language says that they can still try to do that. I assume my expectation is that will happen again, because I think that, all you have to do is speak to them and you will find that they are actually still in great need, way beyond the money that we assigned. So that's going to be my expectation. This is a very difficult and uncomfortable situation to find at least for myself, I can speak for myself. Obviously, we don't want to leave money on the table, but it is just odd that at a time when everything we're hearing from our constituents is that the need is just exponential, that somehow these efforts, that somehow they couldn't spend down the money. And at the same time, those same folks who are leading those efforts are communicating to us that they are actually in need of even more resources.
And we do have executive staff here if you want them to address that specifically. I know they're prepared to talk about why they haven't been able to spend the money. So if the council wants to hear from them, they are on the line.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, so who from executive staff would like to address Councilmember Navarro's questions?
Ms. Michelson, I think Dr. Crowell was on the line.
Yes.
Oh, it looks like Ms. Morris.
Yeah.
Dr. Crowell, you want to start and I can elaborate a little bit about Salud Bienestar?
Sure. Good afternoon, folks. I'm here and I've got Sonia Moro with me and Dorothy Rosarian to be able to answer questions. I wasn't sure who else was on, so forgive me for not jumping right in on this one. And I can speak to the spending issues associated with the two minority health initiatives around testing. In a very general sense, I think we talked about this a little bit with HHS Council, HHS Committee and EC Committee, I think last week when we met. So the challenge for both of these groups has been getting things launched, getting things off the ground, getting things running, and starting off slowly and then ramping up the pace of spending. I'll speak specifically to the African American health initiatives, health programs effort to do their testing regime. They were starting at a very different place than was the case with Salud, in that there was no infrastructure to do a testing consortium in the Black community. No medical providers, no real case management service, just a whole raft of providers who were out there kind of going alone, and it took some time to get them, for AHP to get them together, to get a group of folks together that were agreed to do the work. They had need of and didn't have a fiscal agent akin to Primary Care Coalition, and so they wanted to find a fiscal agent. So we found NCCF, and thanks to Cheryl Brissett Chapman, Dr. Chapman, and her team at NCCF for agreeing to stand up and be the fiscal agent and provide additional support for this initiative. One of the things they had to do after that was, as did both programs, get all of the sub-agreements into place, the subcontracts and sub-agreements into place with providers who had never done that before with us, so with not with the county, but with each other. So those processes took some time to get agreements in place, to get the job descriptions in place, and then they got up and running. Including finding a testing provider to do the testing. So all of that takes time. It took a little less time for the Latino Health Initiative for Salud Bienestar to get themselves up and running. They had a little bit of a head start in terms of thinking about the planning before the appropriation was actually put in place. So there's actually some additional lead time on that. I think the other piece of this for Salud is that they have been incredibly successful after what looked like a very slow start in ramping up testing, and have been an incredibly valuable partner in getting the testing done and hitting those numbers in the last few weeks that we've hit. I think that the unspent pieces, and I'll let Sonia speak to that, but I think it did have to do with some hiring delays and some contracting delays that they had with one particular element of the testing. So I'll stop there and turn it over to you, Sonia, for a second.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Crowell. Yes, you're absolutely right. I think it hasn't been a matter of not being able to spend the money because of lack of need. In many cases, it's a matter of not having all the infrastructure in place. The hiring process for some of the partners actually was a difficult one for many of them. But out of all the components that Salud y Bienestar has, and it is a very comprehensive program, there is only one component that is going to return the most of the money, and this is the clinical follow-up with the people that have been positive. So when I spoke with the agency that is in charge of that particular component, they let me know that the priority at the beginning of the program was basically setting up all the testing elements. And so that's what they were focusing on. The clinical follow-up is something that now is being called hospital at home, which requires special staff. So the vendor was not able to identify quick enough a nurse practitioner and a nurse that were bilingual. They're in high demand, and it was difficult for them to identify. And also the equipment that is needed to conduct this type of telemedicine, if you will, and it's more sophisticated than just regular primary care. They were not able to procure that because the company that provides that type of equipment was actually supplying larger providers. And so the particular partner was at the end of the line, if you will, in terms of being able to do that. They have now secured equipment, they have the positions filled, but this is about $300,000 that this component had, and they were not able to spend it. With regards to the rest of the components, and I personally spoke with all of the partners regarding additional resources, and they told me that at this point they couldn't use anymore. Particularly with Proyecto, I know that they were able to hire, or they were in the process of hiring the additional staff with the amounts of funding that they have. But sometimes going through the hiring process, finding the appropriate people is not something that can be done so easily, particularly with certain elements that we provide, because you need some people with certain types of experience. So some of the other funds that were return, I think it's about $35,000. It's the indirect cost of the primary care coalition because a chunk of the money, the $305, were not returned. So for the most part, everybody is going to be utilizing their funding, but nobody has, to the best of my knowledge, and I've talked to them frequently, asked for additional money. It's not sometimes about having additional resources, but about having the capacity, the infrastructure within the organizations to be able to bring in additional people. And I think that's part of the situation in this case.
Well, I really appreciate that, Ms. Mora, because obviously this particular initiative, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, didn't have that much time to stand everything up. I think probably you guys had probably like 72 hours between the time we finalized the proposal and the time that this council voted to make this appropriation a reality. I think there was, we were fortunate that many of these partners already were up and running and doing a lot of work. So I understand that there was a budget that came forward that pretty much very quickly did a quick assessment of what was going to be needed. But I have to admit, I always assumed that if for some reason any of those components were not able to be realized, that then there would be a consideration to reallocate those resources within the initiative, because it's very frustrating to hear that you've had conversations with these organizations and that they've told you that they really don't, cannot use additional money at a time when we're getting COVID-19 updates from our health officers saying that the cases are skyrocketing and that the zip codes, which have traditionally consistently been most affected, are those where we know that we have Latino population and Black population. So there's a disconnect there that I honestly, and I appreciate, and I, that I'm a big fan of your professionalism. There's a disconnect there that is very disappointing to me personally, because this does not match the reality on the ground. But, you know, again, I have had some conversations with some folks who are telling me otherwise, who are saying we could use formula, diapers. We could, you know, we need to use, yes, more case management. We need to do, you know, and this was yesterday that they needed it, right? But, you know, you're in charge of this initiative. You're telling me that this is the conversations that you've had. And I just hope that as we're moving, you know, forward, I mean, we're going to also, I think, approve a supplemental. I hope that we are able to, in a nimble way, redirect funding if we need to get ahead of what is now an avalanche of need once again. But, you know, I'm going to have to go with your word. And hopefully, because the language has been amended, hopefully the partners will be able to talk to you and Dr. Kroll to see if there are indeed some other needs that have arisen, you know, in the couple of days that they're able to then absorb and therefore provide the support needed to the communities who are suffering the most right now, which are our Black and Latino communities. Thank you.
I'll be happy to do that. We have actually tomorrow a partners meeting tomorrow evening, and I will make sure that I convey the message and once again ask them if they need additional resources and work with HHS to be able to move it. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Navarro, a point of correction on both of those things. One of them is that Sonia Mora, Nordoric, and Rosarian are in charge of the initiatives. It is the executive committees and the teams that have come together to partner to put together proposals and to develop this that are the point people on that. Our job in the department and in the county is really.
Well, that's not what the executive had. That's not what the executive had indicated to me. So I apologize if I have incorrect information. But the executive had informed Councilmember Albornoz and I that Ms. Mora was going to be appointed as the person in HHS who would direct these initiatives. So I apologize if for some reason there was a change that I wasn't informed.
Well, I think that was the case, but I think that is the case in terms of the appointment pieces of it. But the operational pieces that you have an executive committee that has worked with Sonia Mora and her team at LHS for years, in a different kind of role, and those roles still persist. And it was really their guidance around how this proposal comes together, as was the case with the African American Health Program in that process. I think the other thing is that certainly as throughout this process, as the LHIEC came to talk about opportunities to shift and do some things differently, there was some flexibility within as allowed within the appropriation, the initial appropriation, that there was more. You know, it's interesting when you cross this process when the council and we all said that we think that this may not be enough. It's certainly the case that I felt that way. However, my sense of this was based on the assumption that we were not going to see the end of this at the end of December, and that enough was going to roll us into the new year. We were going to need to be back at the counter, at the table, talking about needing more, and indeed where we are. So for me, it was always an expectation that Solidaridad Star and the AHP program, when they were up and running, at least these two pieces of this, along with some of the other things we've talked about that we've been doing in the last couple of months, was going to need to continue because we're not out of this, as you all know at this point. Was that funding enough? From my perspective, no. That we are at a point where both of these initiatives were not able to expend all of the funding is a function of it takes time to stand things up, as you know, and to get things running and to get things going. And sometimes we've hit some snags along the way. So it is. Oh,
absolutely, Dr. Kroll. I totally agree with you in that respect. I think that actually when we took our vote, the entire council, I think, said that this was just, this was the beginning. And I think the good news is that these are, models. But as you can appreciate, we just want to make sure that the money that we are appropriating writ large, whether it's going to be from the general fund or anything else, we want to make sure that it is spent because, again, the need is just exponential, and there's just so much suffering going on right now that we just want to make sure that the help gets to folks. Thank you.
I agree.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I appreciate the thoughtful conversation taking place about this matter. And the council is on record expressing our frustration with the speed at which these care funds have been dispersed. All of us, I think, at various sessions have voiced some concern because we know the need is there. We all see it. And so it is frustrating. And I was doing some research about how other jurisdictions are managing their funds and saw a Washington Post article from November 15th. And the headline in that article was, "As communities suffer, local officials struggle to disperse federal aid. Now a deadline looms." Right? And so I think an accurate headline. And the article goes on to say that there are communities in Ohio and Georgia and a neighbor of ours in Howard County that are experiencing the same problems that we are. That is not at all to absolve us and the efforts to keep our residents healthy and safe. Not at all. But we are not alone in that struggle. And the purpose of this resolution is to ensure that all the remaining CARES funds can be spent and directly allocated to the county priorities, to the residents, the businesses, to everybody that we know needs help. And again, the processes that we've all witnessed within the administration could have been better, and they're continuing to refine it as evident in this conversation, again, through the dialogue. But if we don't approve this resolution, we are leaving $9.9 million on the table, and it'll go back to the federal government. And I can't, in good conscience, do that when I know we have so much need here in the county. And for those reasons, I'll be supporting the resolution.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everything that's been said. This is not the prettiest process that's ever happened. We all knew it from the beginning that we were having to reinvent the wheel, as they say, to build the plane as we're flying it, and that's what's happened. But I too, have said from the very beginning that if we leave one dime of the CARES money on the table, we would be wrong. And I believe that this is, though it's certainly not ideal, but I believe that this is as close as we can come to making certain, with safety valves, that all of the CARES money that we will have received will be spent, and that it's money that would be spent to help people, and so I am supporting this. I as I say, and I guess, Ms. Michelson, if the federal government were to come back and extend the time, how would that play into this?
Yeah, they wouldn't have to continue to spend the money. We've assumed that executive may, not put the brakes on it, but certainly not try and push out any money prematurely. It would give them a little bit more time to spend on these programs that are the highest priorities. But we do think it's good for the council to continue to state what your priorities are so that as opportunities come, they can be directed in a way that is consistent with your goals.
Thank you. We're in agreement. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Vice President Albornoz.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. So lots of thoughts here. I'm going to try to make sense of them. So let me start with the positive. I think council staff came up with a reasonable solution to address this short-term challenge before us, because it goes without saying that we don't want to leave any money on the table that would cut off our nose to spite our face and doesn't make any sense. And I 1,000% agree with Councilmember Friedson's frustration that this is not consistent with comments that were made several months ago. And he, in a sense, predicted where we would be, and here we are. But having said that, I implore the executive branch to get more creative in thinking about how to expend these funds. I'm not just saying through the African American Health Initiative, African American Health Program and Latino Health Initiative. As Council Chair Navarro said, I'm intimately familiar with both initiatives and agree that we have moved heaven and earth to get these programs off the ground, and we're working with key partners and stakeholders to stand up these programs, acknowledging the challenges, the administrative challenges that we have by and large overcome thanks to the incredible leadership of so many different people. But as has been stated by my colleagues, my God, there are so many needs. Our office just yesterday alone received 17 referrals of residents who owe more than $10,000 in rent. And so the money that we're subsidizing through the rental assistance program doesn't even come close to addressing the issues of these particular residents. We keep being told how expensive it's going to be to get our school system prepared to be able to reopen, which will, we appropriated funds for HVAC system, but are there funds that could be appropriated that will put us in a better position to be able to open our schools? We've heard from several of our providers in the food security space that they need help with transportation, and they need help with refrigerated vehicles to be able to more robustly be able to transport food to and from different locations. And that, as we know, the food security issue is going to extend beyond this year. There are so many places, and that's just off the top of my head, that are expenditures that we need to be able to get out and address. And understandably, we have this deferential pay situation, which I know is complicated and has a lot of layers, and all of us have expressed our frustration over in one way or another. But there are other immediate needs. And so we have 3 weeks to go before these funds have to absolutely be spent. And so I agree with giving the executive branch further flexibility to explore how to spend down these resources and acknowledge, again, I know how hard this has been. And there's an administrative burden. Again, I've been there. I know it's not a 1 + 1 = 2. But at the same time, I do think that there's an opportunity here for us, as we have in so many other areas, to further show creativity in being able to spend down these resources in a way that is more consistent than, with what they were initially intended for. So I'll support this measure because, again, I think it makes sense. And we don't want to leave any money on the table. But it also speaks to the infrastructure going into next year as well, and us having a conversation about what more we need to do to ensure that we help our incredible county agencies and their incredible teams who are exhausted and overwhelmed. How can we support them so that when there's another tranche of federal funds that are made available, that we're able to get that money out even more quickly than we were this time around based on the lessons learned? Because there continues to understandably be a little bit of an infrastructure issue, which I can understand on a lot of different levels. But I think that's going to be really important here. So I appreciate this discussion, and obviously it's an ongoing discussion and deliberation, but I appreciate everyone's efforts to date. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my colleagues for their comments. I will support this. I won't bury the lead. I'll support it because it would be, to quote you, Councilmember Katz, it would be wrong to leave a dime on the table for any reason at all, despite the process. I also want to provide a little context. I just read an article this morning, actually, and we're talking about it now. The state of Texas is trying to figure out how to spend $3 billion in CARES funding that they haven't spent. The state of Vermont, $1 billion that they got, they're trying to spend several hundred million for. So, and we're larger than Vermont. So I think that we have to have context. Every jurisdiction, state, local, federal, are dealing with this. This is an unprecedented crisis. The amount of time in normal times to set up a program as innovative as the African American Health Program and in the Salute Program, it just as an example, I think the context of this 5 years from now is going to be like, that was record time. I'm glad Councilman Navarro brought up the time it took to get it going and get it on the street. So I just want to preach a little bit of patience and grace. I'm not happy with how it's gone either. I think we got to do better, but we should get this money reallocated. Hope Congress does the work that we elected them to do, and then improve. I will agree. I think Councilmember Amarna has made a great point as he closed. We have to get better. Our residents need it. The need is there. They're demanding it. We must do better. It's not fair to any of us. I'm sure none of us has worked hard this year as we thought we were going to when the year started. But I just want to just provide that context because I know people are working hard. It's not gone perfectly, but we shouldn't leave a dime on the table. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, if there are no further comments, I need a motion to, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I just want to say, it is tempting to vote no on this as a statement of frustration about this year's planning and everything. I'll be voting yes only because I think that it makes a bad problem worse if we have to use local dollars for something that we could have used federal dollars for. It's just going to leave less money for us to do the things that we need to do, in January and February. So I think we all agree about the problem. And I think, well, most of us agree about the problem. I don't say all of us agree about the problem. Actually, I don't even know who agrees about the problem, to be quite honest. The problem is just, anyway. One of the problems is the unbudgeted expense, and now having to circle back and cover it. But I don't want to, when you're in a hole, stop digging. And I think if we didn't approve this, we would just keep digging that hole. So I'll be voting yes.
Thank you, Councilmember. Okay, I need a motion to suspend the rules.
So moved.
Councilmember Katz moves and Council Vice President Albornoz seconds. All those in favor of suspending the rules to allow us to vote on this, please raise your hand. That is, okay, I think that is unanimous. Yes? Okay, great. Now, the rules are suspended. Can we get a motion to approve the special appropriation? Councilmember Rice moves the appropriation.
Second.
Council Member Katz seconds it. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Hello?
Yeah. Mary? Okay, that is Councilmember Glass. Council Vice. Pardon me? Okay, that is Councilmember Glass, Council Vice President Albornoz, Councilmember Navarro, Councilmember Katz, Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Joanna, Councilmember Reamer. All those opposed? Councilmember Friedson. Okay, thank you. That is 8-1. The appropriation is approved. Moving on to agenda item 10.7. This is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget, COVID-19 Human Services and Community Assistance NDA, COVID-19 response in the amount of $12,803,250 for Montgomery County Food Security Fund and amendment to the FY21 operating budget resolution 19-472, Section D, designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this?
Yes, we have one speaker. The Reverend Patricia Drumming is on the line. Reverend Drumming, you have 2 minutes, and you may begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Council President Hucker and council members. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you today. I am Patricia Drumming, the Executive Director for Rainbow Community Development Center. We want to first commend and thank the council for how you have empowered Rainbow and other food provider agencies to serve those facing food insecurity in a major way. This special appropriation could not have come at a better time as we are experiencing exponential demand for all of our services. Since COVID-19, the number of clients has increased for us from 70 to at least 300 households each week from all over the county. Rainbow distributed over 600,000 pounds of food to 20,000 people, in which 350,000 pounds of that food was shared with partner agencies. In addition to the groceries, we provided prepared meals to 6 low-income HOC and Montgomery Housing Partnership apartment complexes using 3 small locally owned minority businesses in Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Wheaton to help sustain their businesses. This included 3,000 prepared meals, along with 360 sandwich meals for students and their families from Burnt Mills Elementary and Ridgeway Middle School. Additionally, as a safety net provider, We provide meals to those who are misplaced due to eviction and whose utilities have been cut off. Recently, the New York Times highlighted the work of Rainbow, Kingdom Fellowship, and some of our other partner agencies in their recent article, Hunger in the Washington Metropolitan Area. As funds are released, we would like to have some of these funds appropriated to be used toward our ever-increasing critical needs, which are food, staff, storage, and transportation. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Reverend Drumming. That wraps up the speakers for this public hearing, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Pat. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I just briefly wanted to just ask a question, and so I'm not sure who the proper person is that's going to be able to answer. But my question is surrounding, I understand that specifically we're looking at about $12.8 million in food security. I understand that 1.2 million of that is going to the hubs. And there's a question about how that's going to be split amongst the hubs. Obviously, some of our hubs are larger and more stood up than others. And so should some get the additional funding based on how much work they're doing in the community, others need some to be stood up. You just heard as a part of the previous conversation that the need is still out there. We're hearing from hubs about great need that they have for additional COVID kits, all kinds of things. There's great food need that's still out there via Food Council. So just trying to understand about the strategy around how this money is going to be spent and disseminated. If someone could just, and I'm for it, so let me just be very clear, but again, just want a little bit of an understanding as to some of the details.
Yes, good afternoon, council members. This is Naeem Mia, council staff. I will refer that question to Ms. Dennis Squires from the Office of Emergency Management.
Thanks, Ms. Squires.
Hi, thank you all for having us today and thank you for considering this. I don't have the actual numbers for the hubs and how that money, I think there are people in HHS who may be more suited to answer that question about specifically how the money is spent. I can speak on the food portion of it, which is that we will continue to provide them with the level of services that we have until now that seems to be a sustained amount. That is what we asked for in the appropriation to make sure that they can sustain the level of services that they are currently operating on. So that can differ between communities, and that would be part of what they're getting through the appropriation.
Thank you.
There is a total of 1.2 million for the hubs, and that is divided equally among the hubs. It's 150,000 each for each hub.
Okay, thank you for that, Naeem, because that is the big question. That's a little bit concerning, just to kind of put it out there, because you have some hubs that won't be able to spend the money, right? So we're already in the same situation where we just were before with Dr. Kroll, where we're talking about how AHP in some instances, and then for Nuestra Salud couldn't do some of the things with some of the money because they just didn't have it stood up. I mean, so why are we giving them money that they're not going to be able to use? And so wouldn't it be wiser for us to give the individuals what they're asking for? And so I just ask us as a part of this, and I'm not sure, and so now I'm asking council staff if there's flexibility in terms of ensuring that this can get spent. Because remember when I said before about not making the same mistakes we made before? Well, we're about to do that right now. Because giving a hub that's not even really stood up the same amount of money as one that's operating and firing on all cylinders is just a big mistake. I mean, it's just putting money out there that you know is not going to be spent, not going to be utilized, when it can be utilized by some of the other hubs across the county, not just sub-county. But there are other hubs that are actually getting really their feet under them and doing really well. So can someone talk to me about strategy, please?
Councilmember, this is Dr. Kroll. I for some reason can't get my video camera unmuted, or started up again, but that's okay. I don't necessarily need to do that to respond. I think that this, to an earlier point that was made, that this is insufficient in some respects. In many respects, we could get in relationship to the need that we have, and we're going to see. We're going to be in this for a while. The funding we're talking about appropriating is for the next 6 months, so that the sites who are further behind in starting up than some other sites will have an opportunity to catch up and get themselves up and operating fully. I don't think that we're in a situation, just based on the expenditures that the department made on hubs and starting up. I don't think that we're in a place where we're going to see underspending of this initial funding. In contrast, I think that there are some folks who may need a differential amount, and so we may be back to talk about that with you all. We funded in the department off budget just a fair amount of work towards the hubs we saw we needed to do it. There wasn't an appropriation, but we did it because we knew it needed to happen. And I expected that this time around, we'd like to make sure we do it through an appropriation or do it appropriately. But I think that the truth is that as the need rises, we're going to have to figure out a way to meet it. This gets folks into the new year and gets us down the path a little bit until we see what feds may or may not do with a second supplemental. And we will certainly be entertaining requests for differential spending. I don't know what the language in the appropriation reads specifically around the ability to allocate differentially based on where we see levels of spending. But I certainly think that we ought to have some flexibility built into that, so that if it does look like a hub isn't going to spend the funding, that we can flexibly move it around.
Yeah, that would just be my ask. I mean, I'm not going to prescribe to you what I think. I mean, I know firsthand that the BlackRock Hub has asks that are somewhere around $400,000. I know that because I work with them and have talked to them about it. So, I mean, there's a lot of need that's out there, and I'm not sure what some of the other hubs need or are asking for, but certainly when you look at the 1.2, Germantown asking for 1/3 of that doesn't bode well in terms of us making sure if we're going to be spending this money and splitting it evenly amongst the various hubs doesn't seem as though it's going to get what we want out of it. So again, I just hope that when it comes to the language that's there, and again, I'm leaning more on council staff at this point, if there's any kind of language that's in that may need to be changed to make sure that flexibility is there. But I do believe that that's really important and critical for us to avoid the prior conversation that we just had. I mean, it was just based on the same sort of thing where we already are hearing asked from community. I'm just talking with one hub that I know personally, and I'm sure if we talk to others, we'll find out things that they're looking at as well. So from that perspective, let's get out in front of this instead of reacting to it later, which means people aren't served in a timely manner. So,
and I'm certain that in thinking about that, we're talking about equity in terms of access to resources, so that if there's a fixed pot of funding, that we're not talking about pulling from one hub to give to another one, because they've had the advantage of being out and running farther down the pike. Doesn't mean there isn't a need in other parts of the community for those hubs to stand up as well.
That's right, because I definitely don't want to pit our hubs against each other. So I'm happy that you're hearing me clearly, and that I want all of their requests to be met. And so understanding what that need is and getting that. Now again, did I understand you correctly that this is through January, or is this through June?
This is through June, I believe.
Okay. So with June, let me just say that, again, we're going to have a lot of needs. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. Look, Dr. Crowell, you and I have talked about this. I know that you're supportive of what it is that we're trying to do. It's just, again, our frustration, well, I shouldn't speak for others. My frustration is one in which, because we're oftentimes so, our hands are tied based on structures and procedures that we have in place, and rightfully so. We asked and insisted that they be there, but in a time like this, we're really trying to get around some of those to be more efficient and nimble. when it comes to getting this money out and getting it disseminated to the folks that need it. And oftentimes those structures and processes that we have in place stand in the way of us being effective when it comes to being more nimble and quick in terms of being proactive instead of reactive. And so from that perspective, again, you've heard me, so now you know where my concerns are. Maybe some of my colleagues have some comments as well, but just hope that some of that flexibility in there will allow you to do some of the things that I've talked about. I yield back, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate Councilmember Rice going down this line. When we appropriated the $10.3 million in June, everyone said, we all knew this was going to be an interim amount. It wasn't going to be enough. We were going to need to come back and do more. We didn't fully know how many hubs there would be and where they would be and how it would take off. And, as everyone knows, I was very involved in the East County hub, and then obviously have visited all of them at this point. And they're all a little different, but one thing that isn't different, they're all meeting great need in their respective communities. And so I have a couple thoughts. I definitely don't want to pit anyone against each other, but they are different models. And Councilmember Rice talked about what's going on in Germantown. The Kingdom Fellowship and Reverend Pat, thank you for being here. The partnership with Rainbow, that is kind of a hub and spoke model where you have multiple providers. That Kingdom is the recipient of the money, but it's going out, to support the work for like 4 or 5 other organizations in different parts of the county, and Kings and Priests and obviously Rainbow and others. So I think we need to think about how we acknowledge those differences and get more money into the fund. I think, yes, give the 150 minimum to the all of them, but and I think I heard you say this, Dr. Kroll, about differential in some way. I know when we launched the 10.3 million and launched the Montgomery County Security Fund, that the Community Foundation and is now being worked on with Heather and her team at the Food Security Council, that is raising money. It needs to raise more. So shout out to them. But can that be a way to maybe an update on those funds as a way to supplement the differential or partner with the government to do that in the interim, and then we can figure out a better strategy for after the post 6 months of June. But I don't want to. We need to get this money out the door, 150 to all of the organizations. But we do need to recognize that, as has been mentioned, at least several of these, Germantown, Kingdom Fellowship, and the Hub and Spoke, they have immediate needs. And we just saw a presentation about the insane numbers that these folks are serving and how that increases every week. And so I guess the 2-part question to Dr. Kroll and maybe Ms. Bruskin about, is that a possibility? And the way I read the appropriation, it looks like there is flexibility to move the money around. But again, I don't want to be taken away from anybody. I want to see if we can add from maybe the private sector source or through HHS, or you come back to us and ask for additional authority. But so could you address that, maybe Dr. Kroll first and then Ms. Bruskin?
Sure. I mean, I can't speak to the foundation pieces of this. I'll leave that to Heather to talk a little bit about. But I can say that and I don't know what the appropriation does in terms of flexibility to move it around. But my hope is that there is language in there. I haven't seen the latest version of it. I apologize for not having it in front of me. But I think my sense of this is that as we look into the next fiscal year, my longer term thinking about hubs post COVID is that hubs continue to be a viable network of partners in the community who are serving and analyzing and understanding the needs of the communities that they represent, that they live in and work in, and conveying that information back to us in government so that we can, in HHS, tailor services appropriately for that region, but also so that we can partner with them to meet those needs in an ongoing way. And I think there is basis for supporting the collective of partners that we call hubs, and not just about food, but about food and other resources and other kinds of support that they need in that community. So the hub isn't, right now, hubs obviously are necessarily primarily about food and material resources to make sure they survive, but it also is about connecting people to case management and the mental health services and to all kinds of things that they need that are local in the community, and it's a provider network coming together to share their collective power and resources to support the need, and giving us guidance, as I said, about how we help and build support in the future. So that is necessarily differential. I mean, I think, to your point.
And let's go to this council staff just real quick to answer the question that I think Councilman Rice and I both asked. I read it as there is flexibility, but can you confirm that?
There is a minimum of $150,000 for each hub, but there's nothing that precludes us from adding more funds to those hubs as needed, whether by reallocating existing appropriations or even seeking a supplemental appropriation once that is determined to be needed.
Okay.
So the floor is $150,000.
Got it. Ms. Breskin?
Thanks so much for the question, Council Member. And the long-term financial sustainability of the hubs, as well as the food security initiatives, is something obviously that we're thinking about carefully. And the hub and spoke model has already been of interest to private sector funders. And early in the pandemic, the Food Council received funding from 2 different entities to subgrant to both hubs and spokes. And Pat and Rainbow Community Development Center were one of the partner subgrantees through that initiative. And so I think obviously that's a small segment of the amount of funding that's needed to continue these operations, but that's a conversation we've been actively having with Anna Hargrave and the Community Foundation related to the Food for Montgomery Fund to see if there's a possibility of generating additional financial support for hub operations through that effort. So that's definitely been discussed, and I don't want to steal any of Anna's thunder, but I know that there was a significant milestone that was achieved just today in terms of fundraising. So obviously that's an area of focus for sure, is supporting those community level initiatives and their partnerships with other organizations.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then the last thing I'll say, Dr. Kroll, if you and I saw Mark Hodge pop on, come back to us as, yes, we all envision the hubs being a long-term sustainability delivery model, and as the county executive, and you share that. So maybe it's as part of that we recognize the differential. We passed this today, and then think about that more long-term, but or medium-term. But I'd love to hear more about that from you all.
Happy to share that with you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
Terrific, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask about how this interfaces with the Community Foundation, Food for Montgomery, and what the status of that was. It sounds like you're allowing for them to announce what the status of that is later, so I won't force you to do that. But if you could just, in broad strokes, what is the total food security plan? What is that number at now? I know it has changed. We had a huge number originally. We got significant financial help from the federal government. That help changed. Maybe that changes again, but what does that number look like total in terms of the full plan? And then what role is the county playing in that? And where do we see other entities, including the Community Foundation Fund, playing in that? And then where does this $12 million piece fit into that plan for the next 6 months?
I can address that. This is Mark Hodge from HHS. We had, in discussions with the Community Foundation and looking at what we wanted to do for the January to June budget time for food security, we made the decision that we would fully fund everything that we needed to do, assuming that the Community Foundation would raise $0. Obviously, that's not the case, and they have raised funding and continue to raise funding, but it was not our intention to assume they would raise a certain amount and to underfund ourselves at the very beginning. So we have asked for the full 12 million plus to continue to provide the same services we've been providing through the end of June. Any supplemental funding that comes from the Community Foundation could potentially supplant some of that, which could then be help provide more funding for the hubs potentially, or that we spend on other initiatives that may pop up otherwise. So that's
the goal is that this $12.8 million will be offset by $5 million in private fundraising. Is that what I'm hearing?
Potentially, I mean that's I think that's the community foundation's goals is $5 million.
Okay, and then the thought process is this is at a general fund reserve, so you're allocated to spend up to 12.8, but if it is offset by private fundraising, that there would be no issue for the county because it would just stay in general fund reserves. Is that
correct? Unless there's an
drawing on general fund reserves up to the point that you need, and if you're offsetting some of that with private fundraising, then you would just that would either reduce the amount or increase the effort. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay,
unless there's an expectation from the appropriation that we spend every penny.
No, I don't think that there is. I think my only expectation would be if you're spending more than the 12.8 based on the private fundraising, that you come back and notify the council, as if it were like an NDA. That's how it would work, even if you're offsetting the fund, so that we're aware of how the money is being spent and offset and what the total amount is.
Absolutely.
Okay, if there's a way to include that in the resolution, I appreciate the public commitment here, but I think that would be helpful to me. I look forward to hearing what the update is on the amount that's been raised. I think we all do. You've wet our beak here a little bit and piqued our interest. So look forward to hearing that. And just so I'm clear on the points that have been made about the hubs, section 2 of the action item, it raises the issue that was mentioned just now, that it's $150,000 for each hub, and that's seen as a minimum for basically operational costs, it sounds like.
Yes.
And then that would cover the entire 1.2 million. So is the thought process that there's the flexibility within the balance of the $11.6 million remaining in the rest of the appropriation to provide additional funding to some of the hubs if there is a need based on the Food Recovery Task Force plan? I mean, is that, I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, because that's how I'm reading it based on what you've said, and I just want to make sure that everybody's expectations here are the same.
I think that is a possibility. The Food Security Task Force has budgeted for all of that money. If we underspend somewhere else, we obviously could reassign that to the hubs if that's where the need is. Or in the end, we come back for an additional supplemental appropriation for the hubs because all the other money is being spent on the allocated budget items.
Okay, I appreciate it. So just to be clear, each of the hubs are getting $150,000. That is what the current plan is, no less and no more than $150,000. Should there be a need for additional funding, like Councilmember Rice mentioned the request in Germantown, which was a large one. Councilmember Joanna mentioned East County, which is working with a lot of other partner organizations. You would either take it out of another area that is underspent, or you come back to us. Is that's what we're talking about?
Yes, that's correct. And just to be clear, every single one of the hubs tomorrow could spend $150,000 on diapers and formula. So there's no question whether that money will be spent by each of the 8 hubs.
Great. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. I would just ask that it sounds like the flexibility that Councilmember Rice asked for already exists. I'm glad we got that clarification. And I would just ask that we have the expectation that if the amount exceeds the 12.8 based on offsetting of other resources, federal or private sector, that the executive branch come back to the council, even if it doesn't require an additional appropriation, at least a formal notification to the council so that we're aware. Thank you, Mr. President.
And if I can just add one more thing, I'm sorry, Council President. The food assistance or food security appropriation that we're asking for today includes a giant amount, $6 to $8 million. I can't remember off the top of my head, for bulk food and produce purchases. All of the hubs are included among 30 other food assistance providers across the county in receiving that funding, those produce or bulk food items. So none of the $150,000 needs to be spent on food. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the exchange because this answered a lot of the questions that I had as well. I do want to express my appreciation to Mr. Hodge because you took on this issue of the hubs early on. We began to talk about this. This was something that I felt very strongly about because I know that organically this is the best thing to do in our communities, to have this kind of central service delivery model and oftentimes shared early on the pandemic that this should definitely be the way forward for us. And I'm very excited to hear that the executive, who I have discussed this with for a long time, agrees with that. And I think we're well on our way. I also am glad to hear that the hubs could spend this money like today on diapers and formula, because that means that with the previous item that we discussed, that they're actually going to be able to take advantage of that. And so that should offer some additional resources that they can spend right away. And that's very good news. But I do think that to the extent that we can immediately begin to assess the present need of those hubs that have been up and running for a while and now have so many families that they're serving, I think we should really look into that ASAP to see whether we need to come back right away and do something else. Because obviously once the community begins to build that trust, the worst thing that can happen is for them to not have the necessary resources and have to turn people away. So I would very much like to, see whether pretty soon we can engage in that conversation. Maybe it's a committee meeting. I mean, we're literally having like a committee session right now. So I appreciate the fact that it is kind of, tough, but maybe we can have a subsequent committee meeting in January, joint committee perhaps, to see where we are and then, assess whether we need to then add those additional funds. But thanks to all for really doing extraordinary work and underneath this type of model. Thank you.
Well, Councilmember Navarro, I just wanted to say thank you. You and I had a conversation about this way back when at the beginning of this about hubs, and so you know where I stand on this and have stood for a while on this idea. So happy to see this unfold. To the point about immediate needs and going forward, I know that Mark and members of the hubs, the leadership of the hubs are meeting or will be meeting to discuss the long range thinking about the hubs, but also can add this issue around what's more immediately needed for the hubs as well. So that's perfect. It will be an ongoing conversation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sometimes I wish I'd chime in earlier in these conversations, but in this case, I'm happy I chimed in late because this was really productive, really helpful. All of my questions were answered in some form or fashion, but I just want to echo a few things and underscore a couple of things. One, we've talked about this in many different settings. I even wrote about this in one of my recent newsletters. It's the hubs that really give me a lot of hope that we're actually going to come out stronger from the pandemic than we were before it. Because it's bringing to bear a lot of community stakeholders who were doing work individually in some cases, but now we're doing it much more holistically and much more strategically. And it's really powerful. And I completely agree with Councilmember Navarro that, and I know Councilmember Rice and I have talked about this, that we do need to have a joint session shortly after the holidays to talk about the sustainability of these hubs, because it's hard to believe it's already December. I know the executive branch is already in the throes of preparing their next operating budget. And I assume that some of the administrative and strategic decisions may be reflected in what's recommended in that operating budget to ensure their sustainability. And it's a complex puzzle that probably in some form or fashion includes our regional service centers, which actually used to provide some of the direct service links and connections previously, like 10 years ago. And so I think there's a real opportunity for us to do something creative here. And I also want to clearly connect the dot to our previous conversation with funds that we may be able to access right now to take off some of those line items that were requested within budgets that can be addressed in a different way, which would, I think, make everyone really satisfied and happy because it's more consistent with what we had recommended for those funds in the first place. But I want to end here and just, I really do, we acknowledged the Black Rock Center for Performing Arts this morning, and Councilmember Joanna talked about context earlier, and I love that term. It's so important. It was in a different context. But in this context, we often talk about all the hubs, and they are all important. They are all doing great things. I think one of the reasons why we started in the upper part of the county is because we don't have quite the same infrastructure than we have in other parts of the community. And so there were folks that identified and worked with incredible providers to stand up a need that has been expanded and enforced and is really remarkable. And we have amazing community-based organizations that have been doing work in the upper part of the county for a number of years now. And thanks to Councilmember Rice and Councilmember Katz, who have been extraordinarily supporting them through their now third and second terms, it was like the perfect timing because that infrastructure that had been put in place, we were now able to maximize and leverage, and now we can expand upon it so that we have the same infrastructure that we have had in other parts of the community for a little bit longer. And so I think that also bodes well for our future in terms of service delivery, and I think is really great. And Dr. Crowell, I really want to give you a lot of credit too. I think you saw early on the value of these partnerships and alliances, and you assigned one of your most impressive staff members in Mark Hodge to make sure that it got the attention that it deserved and that it's gotten off the ground. And so to my good friend Grace Rivera Oven and all of the other hub leaders that are out there, you are all angels. We have your back, all of us, HHS, the county executive, and the funds that we're appropriating today for $150,000 are just the next step in the investments that we're going to be making. And we're going to see what other funding we have in the short term we can utilize to meet the current needs that we know are huge. So this is a real success story. And to my good friend Heather Bruskin and all the folks in the food security space, wow. Lots of work yet needs to be done, but clearly the infrastructure that has been established there over almost a decade now, even longer, is really starting to bear fruit, no pun intended. So I think we're excited about our future. This is a good conversation. Thank you. I yield back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Okay, we need a motion to suspend the rules. Councilmember Rice moves, and Councilmember Joanna seconds. All those in favor of suspending the rules, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. And we need a motion to Councilmember Rice again, and second. Councilmember Navarro, terrific. All those in favor of the special appropriation, please raise your hand. That is also unanimous. Excellent. We are rolling, folks. Item 10.8. This is a special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget, COVID-19 Human Services and Community Assistance, NDA, COVID-19 response in the amount of, I beg your pardon, 10.8, correct?
Correct.
This is a public hearing on a special appropriation, the county government's FY21 operating budget, COVID-19 Human Services and Community Assistance, NDA, on the amount of $4,620,997 for nuestra salud y bienestar, for our health and well-being. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
No speakers for this public hearing.
Terrific. We need a motion to suspend the rules.
So moved.
Councilmember Navarro suspends the rules, and Councilmember Katz seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Terrific. We need a motion to pass this special appropriation.
So moved.
Councilmember Katz moves, and Councilmember Navarro seconds the special appropriation. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is also unanimous. Terrific. Congratulations. Okay. Item 10.9. This is a public hearing on a special appropriation to the county government's FY21 operating budget, COVID-19 Human Services and Community Assistance NDA in the amount of $3,341,444 for the African American Health Program Executive Committee Targeted COVID Response, and resolution to amend the FY21 operating budget for the Montgomery County Government Resolution 19472, Section G, designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status, the National Center for Children and Families, Inc. Action is scheduled immediately following this hearing. Ms. Kennedy, do we have speakers for this public hearing?
No speakers for this public hearing.
No speakers. Councilmember Rice.
I just wanted to move the appropriation.
Second.
Great. I believe first we have to suspend the rules. Do you want to move to
sorry.
suspend the rules?
Sorry.
Hey.
Suspend the rules. Thank you, Mr. President.
Second.
Is there a second? Councilmember Juando seconds. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That's unanimous. Now, Councilmember Rice, do you want to move this special appropriation? Terrific. Anybody want to second it? Councilmember Juando seconds it. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Terrific. That's also unanimous. We are one united block here today. Okay. 10-9 is dispensed with. We are moving on to the legislative session, folks. Day 38. Sorry, changing the documents here. This is a introduction of Bill 4920, Human Rights and Civil Liberties, Discrimination in Rental Housing, Fair Criminal History and Credit Screenings, the Housing Justice Act. Lead sponsors are Council Members Glass and Katz, and co-sponsors Council Members Juando, Rice, Navarro, and Reamer. Council Member Glass, do you have anything to say about this piece of legislation?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. Just overnight, the temperature dipped below zero here in Montgomery County, and our county and nonprofit partners are working overtime to make sure that nobody experiences homelessness, not only during wintertime, but certainly not during a pandemic either. And at the same time, we here in Rockville and our colleagues in Annapolis and on Capitol Hill are working to reform our criminal justice system. And it is with that as a backdrop that I'm pleased to introduce with Councilmember Katz the Housing Justice Act, which at its fundamental, we have to recognize that housing is a basic right. And we know that individuals who were formerly homeless and those who've served time need housing just like anybody else. And the Housing Justice Act will ensure that housing is exactly that, more just, more fair, and more equitable for everybody. No one should be denied housing because they couldn't afford to pay a traffic ticket while they were experiencing homelessness. And yes, that is a real life example of what's happening. We actually thought, Councilmember Katz and I, of calling this bill the Second Chance Act. But the reality is that the barriers we know that have been erected because of our systemic racist policies actually prevent some people from having a first chance. So we didn't call it that. And so I'm proud that the Housing Justice Act has been endorsed by the Montgomery County chapter of the NAACP because they understand that the discriminatory history of housing laws and the generational effects of those laws and regulations have had adverse effects on our community, on the communities of color, and on our cycles of poverty. And so the Housing Justice Act will help more people access housing by strengthening our anti-discrimination laws. And while we've made strides here in Montgomery County, we can and should always strive to do better for our most vulnerable residents. And so I sincerely want to thank Councilmember Katz, co-authoring this with me, and then Council Members Juando, Rice, Navarro, and Reamer for your co-sponsorship of this legislation. Thank you.
Terrific. Okay, I see no other speakers. So that bill, Councilmember Katz.
Yeah, thank you. I did text you too, but I don't know that I sent the text, but I did text you. You probably didn't get it. I just realized I didn't send it. But thank you, Councilmember Glass. Thank you, Mr. Council President. Thank you, Councilmember Glass, and for the council staff and the many public and private stakeholders who have worked with us to get us here today. And I especially want to thank Mary Geis from my office, who's worked tirelessly with Councilmember Glass's office as well. But I know I entered public service, and I think all of us did, to help ensure that Montgomery County residents and others have equitable access to happy and successful lives. That's why we're here. The Housing Justice Act advances that mission. It reduces bias against homeless and justice-involved individuals in the rental housing market. Montgomery County residents exiting homelessness often face discriminatory housing practices rooted in systemic racism. The Housing Justice Act equalizes the power differential between landlords and the prospective tenants, ensuring clarity and transparency of rental application requirements. It also acknowledges the need to more deeply understand an individual's experiences and humanity. We all make mistakes, sometimes due to circumstances beyond our control, and other times due to bad decisions. Regardless, we believe that people have the right to make amends and move forward. I also want to say that Councilmember Glass and myself went to all sides of the issue. We went to AOBA, we went to people who were advocates, and we sat down with them and said, look, this is what we're wanting to do. How about working with us? And every one of them worked with us. Not to say that there's, that everybody thinks that every part of this is the best thing that ever happened, but every one of them worked with us, and all of them have said that we need to do something with it. So I thank them very, very publicly, because that's what this is going to take. That we can, at this point, especially during a COVID, to have people that could be homeless because of something that they did years ago is just not what any of us want. So thank you, Councilmember Glass, and thank you, everyone else.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to thank Councilmember Glass and Katz for introducing this bill. It is really important. As it was mentioned, there is no doubt that it has an alignment with our racial equity and social justice efforts. The truth of the matter is that it really does and can affect anybody. But I particularly want to thank you for what you just said, Councilmember Katz, for working with different stakeholders and different organizations to come up with at least something that everybody could, embrace, even if there in the future could be some amendments as we go through our work. But I have to say that I honestly just appreciate that kind of effort and that strategy of making sure that there is this kind of all stakeholder investment and buy-in. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, no other speakers. That bill is introduced. Let me move on to Bill 5020, the Landlord-Tenant Relations, Fire Safety, Removal of Mercury Service Regulators. Lead sponsor is Council President Hucker. Let me tell you about this bill. 4 years ago, colleagues, we had a tragic incident, you all remember, that took the lives of 7 of our residents and injured many, many more. Over 65 were hospitalized, hundreds were displaced. I remember that night and the subsequent weeks very, very well. And that event was the horrifying gas explosion at the Flower Branch Apartments. One of the very frustrating things about that deadly accident, and what we've learned about it since then, is that it was preventable. Several years after the explosion, and after a multi-year investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board, which has jurisdiction over pipeline safety, they concluded that it was the explosion was due to the failure of an indoor mercury service regulator that contributed to the deadly explosion by letting natural gas build up inside the interior boiler room at Flower Branch Apartments. From their report is that these indoor mercury service regulators were widespread. They were used to stabilize gas pressure and installed in buildings constructed before 1960. And to this day, gas service providers are responsible for servicing and maintaining them. And we believe there are hundreds in our area. However, Washington Gas has failed to replace them. And in my meetings with them, they will say they don't know where they are. It's basically as simple as that. They've actually been allowed by our Maryland Public Service Commission to collect additional fees from ratepayers to replace these, and collected millions of dollars, but the dangerous, outdated mercury service regulators have not been replaced. So this bill will connect those two dots between the folks who have the information, the property owners, and the folks who are charged with replacing the gas regulators, the Washington Gas, by requiring landlords to simply survey their property and report any indoor mercury service regulators to the county and request that Washington Gas remove it. Equally important, the bill requires the landlord to just keep the tenants informed throughout the process. So with that, I'd like to introduce the bill. Councilmember Riemann. I think you're muted.
Yes. Great bill. Thank you. I remember the day that we attended a press event with CASA outside of one of the Flower Branch apartment buildings. And I remember Delegate Tarkoudian explained to me for the first time about these regulators. And it sounded like a very complex problem. And I'm just really pleased that you were able to figure out a way to tackle that. So thank you, Councilmember Hucker. Really appreciate your sponsorship. And I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Albernoz.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Yes, I too would like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Councilmember Novato.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a very vivid memory for me. When I arrived at the scene, it really felt like I was in a war zone. It was just extraordinary. And just the conversations with so many people at the Long Branch Community Center right after it had happened, trying to triage the situation. It was, I mean, it had just occurred. And I know, Councilmember Hucker, I remember when you shared how, you were there right after it happened. It was just amazing and heartbreaking to hear the stories. And so, yes, it's taken a while to get to a point of understanding exactly what happened and what we can do to address it. But I think it's important to do whatever we can, especially in support of and in the memory of all of those that were affected. So I am happy to request that I also be added as a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Thank you. And I should clarify, we do not have the authority to regulate Washington Gas, as you know, but as I mentioned, they've already collected the additional fees to be able to do this. And in my meetings with them, they are absolutely willing to replace the regulators once they find out where they are. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Council President. Very, very fine legislation, and I too would like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Yeah, thank you very much, Council President. I'd like to be added as co-sponsor.
Thank you. Okay, with that, the bill is introduced. The next bill is Bill 5120, the Window Safety Act. It affects landlord-tenant relations, window guards, lead sponsors, also Council President Hucker. Let me tell you about this bill. The Window Safety Act is also, I believe, needed to prevent, to improve the safety of our tenants, specifically to prevent children from falling through windows. According to the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, each year in the United States, 15 to 20 children under the age of 11 die and nearly 15,000 are injured because of falls from windows. Window falls tend to occur in low-income neighborhoods with deteriorating or aging housing and unsatisfactory window construction. Unfortunately, incredibly, we've seen a few of these cases in Montgomery County. The most recent was just 2 months ago when 2-year-old Ezekiel Gumizi died after falling out of a window at his family's Tacoma Park apartment. This heartbreaking incident left a young mother in grief and entire community mourning his death. The accidents are completely avoidable, and we should not let one more child fall through a window in the county. We should make sure our housing code reflects that. There was also earlier this year a child who fell through a window in Gaithersburg, and incredibly another toddler that fell out of an 11-story window in Tacoma Park last year, but survived but was seriously injured. Other jurisdictions have solved this problem. New York City has a Window Safety Act. that requires landlords of apartment buildings to install and maintain window guards if a child 10 years of age or younger lives in the home. So I look forward to working with you and the stakeholders to pass this bill in order to ensure safer living conditions for the children of Montgomery County. Council Vice President Albornoz.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Hucker. I had the opportunity to hear you speak about this during the media briefing yesterday, and I really appreciate your effort and that of your staff to put this together. I know it is beyond description how emotional this was for the family that was impacted, and I think this is a very thoughtful and well-devised solution that I know our landlords want to be part of that solution. And so I think it's critically important for us to do what we can to safeguard our families. I have a toddler at home right now who is a climber, I will say, and you just never know when kids can get involved in different things. And as parents, you can't have your eyes and ears on them at all times. It's impossible. Especially when you have numerous children, and especially now that we're home much more often than we were before because of the virus. So I think this bill is timely. There is a way that we could name it after this little boy. I think that'd be appropriate because I think this is an important step forward. So thank you very much, Mr. Council President. I'd like to be listed as a co-sponsor.
Thank you, Council Vice President. That's a great suggestion. Councilmember Novato.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also would like to be added as a co-sponsor and associate myself with the remarks made by Councilmember Albornoz and yourself. Obviously, this is just one of those extraordinarily heartbreaking situations. And as a mom, something that I know we all, always have in the back of our minds in terms of how to protect our children. But yes, there are moments when things like this can occur, and to have this additional security measure would definitely save lives. So thank you so much for thinking about this particular proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Yeah, thank you very much, Council President. It was back in May that happened. I still remember it. And so I'd definitely like to be added as a co-sponsor. I think it's a great piece of legislation. Obviously, working with all of the stakeholders, we will figure out all of the nuances, but this is a great bill, and I think it's a great way for us to move forward to encourage safety all around our residents, oftentimes in a lot of housing that's lower income and is occupied by oftentimes people of color. And so from that perspective, there's a huge tinge on this as well in terms of equity. And so really just want to say thank you for paying close attention to this and coming up with a solution. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little slow on the draw with my unmuting. Important legislation. Thank you again. I really appreciate how when there is an issue that's identified in the community, you're often quick to action. And I think this is a good one. I think I saw that story as well, and I'm just I'm glad to be able to ask to co-sponsor this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, that bill is introduced as well.
Yes,
Councilmember Katz, I beg your pardon.
Thank you very much. I too wanted to co-sponsor, and I'm going to suggest that we notify our municipal partners, especially Rockville and Gaithersburg, the larger municipalities, to let them know that we're doing this legislation and that they should either opt into ours or do their own as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. Okay, and so that bill is now introduced. We'll move on to Bill 5220, Landlord-Tenant Relations, Protection Against Rent Gouging near Transit, lead sponsor Councilmember Joanna. Councilmember Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an auspicious day. I sat here watching the introduction of bills, and there wasn't coordination, but unless maybe it was by our central staff, which is much smarter than us in a lot of ways on these several layers of housing protection that are being provided with these bills. I really appreciate Councilmember Glass's work and Councilmember Katz on making sure that people can actually be housed. Right. That's a core function of what you need to do to take care of yourself and or your family. And then these very common sense and practical solutions that are that you put forward, Mr. President. I'm sitting here thinking about that young man, and I want to thank the Renters Alliance and the City of Tacoma Park who kind of came around him and his family and raised money and to help. It's not going to be anywhere near what is needed in the loss of a child. I cannot imagine listening to screams in my background all day, just hoping someone didn't fall and get hit. I mean, just can't imagine. So I just want to thank you for the introduction to those bills. And I'd also like to be listed as a co-sponsor. I waited till my time of Councilmember Glass's bill, but of your two bills as well, Mr. President. This bill is in line. I alluded to it this morning. A recent American Community Survey found that just about half of renters and 23% of homeowners in Montgomery County are housing burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income on housing. We know that about 33% of Montgomery County residents at total rent their homes. And even before the pandemic, the Office of Legislative Oversight did a racial equity profile for Montgomery County and identified that 54.5% of our Black residents are renters, 62% of Latino renters, and 44% of white renters, and 42% of Asian renters. High numbers, almost half or more of everybody were housing burdened, meaning it's expensive to live here. Obviously, the onset of COVID has made things considerably worse, with many people being laid off and facing loss of income. And in October of this year, across the state of Maryland alone, do you all hear that ringing? Okay, good. All right. So it's just me.
I'm concerned you do.
Yeah, I definitely hear it. In October of this year, across the state of Maryland, it was estimated close to 300,000 households were unable to pay their rent, just in October. Our office has taken tons of calls and referred people to services. We heard earlier today from our Department of Health and Human Services that the $20 million we allocated is already accounted for. It's not distributed, but it's been allocated. And sadly, as we approach the winter month and face another spike in COVID-19 cases, the situation is only going to get worse. And once we finally do begin to see some relief and the vaccines start to take hold, which we're all hopeful for, the lack of affordable housing in Montgomery County will be even a greater issue. And renters in particular will be and are at significant risk. So this afternoon, as part of the More Housing for More People initiative I mentioned this morning, I'm introducing this bill 5220, Landlord-Tenant Relations Protections Against Rent Gouging Near Transit. In short, it would establish protections against rent gouging for rental units within 1 mile of Metro Rail, MARC, and Purple Line transit stations, and within 1/2 mile of bus rapid transit stations. We heard earlier this week, last week rather, in the Fed committee, a report from our planning department and their consultants on the housing preservation study that identified proximity to transit as one of the top reasons that prices are going up for renters in transit corridors, and also suggesting that we look at a form of targeted rent stabilization or anti-rent gouging, which this bill is. This would provide exceptions that are important. It would limit the increase to the voluntary rent guidelines established each year by our Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and it will provide for exceptions of 5 years for new construction before new buildings are subject to these range of rents. And it would also allow for renovation. If renovations or upgrades are made, that's an exception as well, to be able to increase the rent outside the guidelines. Preserving affordable housing near transit allows people to stay in their communities and enjoy the benefits of transit-oriented development that housing brings. And this supports this by providing protection against rent gouging and reducing displacement and push out and gentrification that we've seen for renters who currently live near transit, corridors like the Purple Line and Long Branch, where I grew up, and around other metro stations and transit that is built or is being built. This is an important consideration for racial equity. We know that oftentimes communities of color live near transit, and we need to make sure that they can stay there. Bill 5220 also supports economic stability by providing greater accessibility to employment opportunities for our frontline workers and for the people who must rely on public transit to get to work. 5022 gives landlords the ability to raise rents, as I said, up to the voluntary rent guidelines each year. And information we've actually compiled from the planning department shows that most rents around the county have stayed within the voluntary rent guidelines over the last 20 years. And as such, this anti-rent gouging legislation would not cause any undue harm to landlords, especially with the exceptions. The housing preservation study, again, showed that this is a threat to national occurring affordable housing near transit, and that we need to take action on the supply side as I did this morning, and we are doing in other venues, and on the renter protection side. Data from the Urban Institute showed that between 2015 and 2013, that Montgomery County could lose nearly 12,000 affordable units with federal subsidies, 600 public housing units, and 22,000 naturally affordable units. So the combination of these two proposals, the missing middle proposal this morning and Bill 5220, provide a win-win situation for tenants, for landlords, and the environment. If we truly want to provide more housing for more people, we must continue to look for innovative ways to increase affordable housing while protecting our renters. We must do both and not either or. I'm proud that this legislation is supported by the Sierra Club and Casa de Maryland and the Action Committee for Transit and the Renters Alliance, and hopefully more to come to show that we need to have this conversation jointly. So thank you, Mr. President, and I hope my colleagues will support these bills.
Thank you. Okay. So those are all introduced. Now we can move on to item 12, call of bills for final reading. The first bill is Bill 3220, solid waste, trash, waste reduction, source reduction, and single-use straws requirements. The T&E committee recommended approval with amendments, and I'll tell you why. I want to begin by thanking T&E committee members and staff who worked on this important bill, Director Ortiz, Division Chief Kao, and other DP staff and stakeholders who put a lot of thought and input into this process. This is a more complicated issue than we probably believed on the front end and had a lot of nuances. I also want to highlight Councilmember Reamer's leadership on this. He sponsored a bill in 2014 that was ahead of his time when he started our county's conversation about the use of plastic and the need to reduce plastic. Councilmember Rice is nodding. And we were ahead of most counties on this in recognizing the need to reduce plastic, polystyrene and styrofoam and other products, while also being responsive to our small businesses. We're still building on that work. This bill strengthens that and makes it more enforceable. It addresses single-use straws by revising Bill 4114, which currently banned the use and sale of expanded polystyrene food products, to expand the prohibition to include all food service products made from polystyrene. This legislation specifically prohibits the use of polystyrene food service products by food service businesses. It also requires the use of compostable or recyclable food serviceware by the county, and prohibits the sale of polystyrene loose fill packaging in the county. The committee gave particular weight to the feedback of members of our communities, persons with disability, and the Commission on Disabilities. We enacted some amendments in both work sessions to ensure that those who need straws for medical reasons have them, and to protect them from having to discuss their medical needs with a store owner or a vendor. This is a great bill that will help us reduce litter. It'll improve our recycling targets and our recycling compliance, and lower our carbon emissions to reach our climate goals. A number of jurisdictions have adopted bans on expanded polystyrene, disposable polystyrene product. This legislation goes a little farther to also include all polystyrene number 6 products, which you likely know as red Solo cups, because they cannot be recycled, even though they often appear to be. The committee was passed this out enthusiastically, and it's my hope that it'll receive the support of the entire council. Ms. Kao, did you have a comment on this, or are you here as a resource?
I'm here as a resource.
Terrific. So with that, you have a committee recommendation before you. All those in favor? Councilmember Rice, are you you have a question?
Yeah, it's just actually a thank you. I just really, and it's kind of personal, but when Steve Goldstein, who's my chief of staff, was in his later months of ALS, let me just tell you that every day that he was in the cafeteria that he ate with us, he had to start using a straw because he couldn't pick up a can. I really appreciate you guys making sure that you incorporated things like that for our community, and understanding that they did not want to have to disclose or talk about those kinds of things with strangers, other kinds of folks. So kudos to the committee for doing such a great job of balancing between the need for us to make sure we're doing what we need to when it comes to our environment and protecting it, but at the same time ensuring that we protect the dignity and respect those who are struggling with their own challenges. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a committee recommendation in front of us. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Glass.
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Tawando.
Yes.
Mr. Tawando votes yes. Mr. Reamer.
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Varro.
Yes.
Mr. Varro votes yes. Mr. Rice.
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson.
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Albornoz.
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Hooker.
Yes. Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. The next bill is Bill 4220, Ethics, Public Accountability, and Transparency Amendments. The GO Committee recommends approval with amendments. Let me recognize the chair of the GO and Fiscal Policy Committee, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will report out what we did in the GO committee and then perhaps turn it over to Councilmember Friedson, who is the lead sponsor. And then we'll see also whether Mr. Drummer has anything that I might have left out or anything like that, if that's okay with you. So as I said, so this is Bill 42-20, Ethics, Public Accountability, and Transparency Amendments. And the lead sponsors, Councilmember Friedson, co-sponsors Rice, Rice, Katz, Glass, Navarro, and President Hooker. So this was introduced in September 29th, and we had a public hearing on October 20th. We did have one speaker, and that was Mr. Tibbetts on behalf of the county executive, who supported the bill. And this is what the bill as introduced would do: require the executive to disclose a proposed employment contract with an appointee to a non-merit position in any employment contract with an employee currently serving in a non-merit position to the council. Also include the sale or promotion of certain intellectual property by a public employee as other employment. Prohibit a public employee who has received compensation from an individual or organization in the previous 12 months from participating in a procurement with that individual or organization. Require a public employee who participates in a procurement process with an individual or organization seeking to do business with the county that compensated the public employee for services performed more than 12 months before the participation began to disclose the prior relationship to the procurement director. Require an elected official or non-married employee to disclose, with some exceptions, the source of each fee greater than $1,000 received for services in a financial disclosure statement, and prohibit the chief administrative officer from engaging in other employment. In addition to what was contained in the bill, the government operations voted 3-0 to adopt additional amendments. Councilmember Friedson's amendment to broaden the prohibition on participation in a matter with an organization or individual that employed the public employee or the employee's immediate family members in the prior 12 months, and also to clarify that the source of income disclosed on a financial disclosure statement must be all fees received from one individual or organization totaling more than $1,000 during the reporting period. And so those are the elements of the bill. Those were the amendments, and the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee did adopt that 3-0. I would say that as you probably can see in the packet, OLO estimates a minimal impact on racial equity and social justice among Montgomery County government employees and the county as a whole, and OMB also anticipates minimal fiscal impact. With that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Friedson, who's the lead sponsor, and then Mr. Drummer, in case I missed any elements of what we adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the Council President, and thank you to colleagues. This bill really is about building public trust, increasing accountability and transparency, and strengthening the county's ethics laws so they meet Montgomery County standards. Our only currency in public life is public trust, and Montgomery County residents expect and deserve that the highest ranking officials in county government, elected and appointed, hold themselves to the highest possible ethical standards. And this really is just about good government, which is what we have always prided ourselves on in Montgomery County. It helps to close some loopholes that have become all too apparent, both in some unfortunate incidents that have recently occurred in Montgomery County, but also incidents that have occurred in other jurisdictions in and around and including the state. And so what this will do is it will hold our appointed officials to those higher standards. It increases the reporting requirements. It prohibits issues that have become problems related to potential conflicts of interest. It provides additional transparency and accountability for county government. Just a couple highlights. One of the areas, we currently have a cooling off period. 12 months after you leave county government, you're prohibited from actively being involved in issues related to the county. But we don't have any such prohibition on the way into county government, when you arguably have more power, more influence, more ability in your role of public trust. And so this would create a 12-month entering period for that prohibition, in addition to a 12-month exit. It prohibits the CAO, the Chief Administrative Officer, highest elected official, from having outside employment. I appreciate, and I just want to note, our current CAO has made a point to say that he wouldn't take outside employment, separately from this legislation, but this would codify and require and create that as a permanent formal expectation moving forward. This isn't about any individual incident or individual circumstance. This is about what expectations do we have for those who are in positions of public trust in a jurisdiction like Montgomery County that holds itself to the highest possible ethical standards. I think this is a very powerful statement that we are making together as a council. It follows in the footsteps of the work that we have already done with the GEO committee and this council in the prior year, the first year of our work with the strengthening of the Office of Inspector General and the increasing of our oversight role, making sure that all taxpayer dollars are invested efficiently, appropriately, and responsibly. And I think that this is a significant statement of who we are and what we expect and what our residents in Montgomery County deserve. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Okay, we have a committee recommendation. I'm sorry, did Mr. Drummer say whether there anything's left out? No other comments. Okay, great. We have a committee recommendation. All those, please, clerk, do you mind calling the roll, please?
Mr. Glass.
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Tawando.
Yes.
Mr. Tawando votes yes. Mr. Reamer.
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Ms. Navarro.
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Rice.
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson.
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Albornoz.
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Hucker.
Yes. That is unanimous. Thank you. And we are now moving on to Bill 4320, Non-Merit Employees, Merit System Employees Severance Pay Limited. The GEO Committee recommends this bill as well, recommends approval with amendments. Let me call on the GEO Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bill 43-20, non-merit employees, merit system employees severance pay, limited lead sponsors, Councilmember Friedson, co-sponsors, Councilmembers Rice, then Council President Katz, Councilmember Glass, Navarro, and also then Council Vice President Hucker. And this bill would prohibit severance pay for a county employee unless authorized by law, and prohibits severance pay for certain employees who violate the ethics law. Basically, the bill includes the following. It expressly excludes The payout of unused leave at termination of employment, a discontinued retirement pension authorized under Section 33-45D, or severance pay under Section 33-139 and 33-140. Bill 4320 would also prohibit all severance pay for an employee who admits to or is found to have violated the ethics law in the 12 months prior to separation from county employment. We did also, in our GO committee work session, we did recommend approval of the bill with an amendment suggested by the county attorney's office, including the discontinued service benefits of elected and appointed members in the list of currently authorized severance pay provisions that would not be affected by the bill. And that was an amendment that we approved. I guess I will say, let's see if I'm looking at my notes here. I think that pretty much covers everything. I will say that the Office of Legislative Oversight, when they did their racial equity and social justice analysis, did find that our Black employees are overrepresented among permanent merit employees and among employees who left the county government compared to the residents' share, but they are proportionally represented in the MLS. And also found that Latinx and especially Asian employees are underrepresented among every Montgomery County government employee group and among employees who left the county government compared to the resident population. And white employees are underrepresented among permanent merit employees and among employees who left county government compared to their resident share, but overrepresented in the MLS, which is, I think, very important information that perhaps we can look into a little more fully later on. But I thought that was interesting information that our OLO was able to find. Also, they found that there's minimal impact to racial equity and social justice for Montgomery County government employees. I'd like to see whether Mr. Drummer thinks I may have left anything out. I don't think I did, but it's possible. After, I guess, Councilmember Phillips, who is the lead sponsor.
Yeah, I'll let Councilmember
Okay.
Friedson speak first, and then I'll have something to add.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to the GO chair as well for this. This is very much a companion bill to the other legislation, speaks to the same issues of public trust, to accountability and transparency, and to good government. This ends a practice that I don't think has any place in Montgomery County, which is the completely unreported, often undisclosed severance packages that are paid out exclusively to political appointees. I don't think it's an appropriate practice. I think that we should be attracting the best talent that we can. We should be paying our political appointees what they deserve, but their compensation that is paid for in taxpayer funding should be publicly, transparently reported. And the idea that there would be payouts that are unknown to the council and completely unknown to the public is totally inappropriate. And will no longer take place. This still allows for the non-discretionary, which is the same for everybody based on rules that is regulated and approved by the council. That exists for merit employees, for the rank and file, hardworking staff. That still exists. That will not change. This is saying that the discretionary funding for the exits and departures of political appointees based on the whim of any particular county executive is not something that should happen here and is not something that will happen here. Again, we have seen this be a troubling practice at the highest levels of government in the state of Maryland and elsewhere. And that same practice had been happening to a certain extent over the years in Montgomery County. I will note it predated this particular county executive, and so I don't want it to be seen as something that is directed at this particular county executive. It has been utilized by multiple county executives, and it will no longer be a practice that can occur. And I just think that this is another example of the expectations that we have for transparency and accountability that this council has really pushed for, and another step in the right direction of good government. Thank you, Mr. President, and the chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Drummer, if I left something out.
I just wanted to add that there's a transition clause that the bill would take effect for anyone who leaves office after the bill takes effect. And there was a discussion about the transition clause at the committee because there's a possibility, I believe that there's one holdover person who has a severance pay provision, one department head in an employment contract. But this bill doesn't prohibit severance pay, and it wouldn't prohibit the executive from proposing and or the council enacting a above board, a transparent severance pay provision that would apply equally to people. So I just want to point that out, that's the application of this.
Just as a point of clarification, the issue that was raised during the committee session subsequently was discussed, and it turns out that there is no issue related to the legislation. So it's been confirmed. I spoke significantly with the executive branch. The one contract or agreement that was seen as a potential concern or issue is not a concern or issue. There is no contradiction or conflict here. Everybody's on the same page, so it is not an issue, but I appreciate that being raised from that committee discussion. Thank you.
Terrific. So we have a committee recommendation. Madam Clerk, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Mr. Glass.
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Dwando.
Yes.
Mr. Dwando votes yes. Mr. Reamer. Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Varro.
Yes.
Mr. Varro votes yes. Mr. Rice.
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson.
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Albornoz.
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Hucker.
Yes. Terrific, and that is unanimous. So next we have expedited Bill 4820, Human Rights and Civil Liberties, Building Maintenance Worker, Minimum Work Week, effective date. Councilmember Reamer is the lead sponsor on this.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. Really appreciate the full council sponsorship. This is important legislation to delay the effective date of this bill that was previously passed by the council, focused on ensuring full-time jobs for building maintenance workers. And we have consensus from both the union, SEIU, and the building owners that they agree that delaying the effective date is in the best interest of all concerned. So we have legislation before us. Appreciate willingness to make it expedited. We had the public hearing earlier today, and I would like to move approval if that's needed, or otherwise just express my support and appreciation.
I think, do we need to
it didn't go to committee, so it does need a motion and a second.
Okay, Councilmember Reamer moves, Councilmember Rice seconds. Madam Clerk, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Mr. Glass.
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Dwando.
Yes.
Mr. Dwando votes yes. Mr. Reamer.
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Varro.
Yes.
Mr. Varro votes yes. Mr. Rice.
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson.
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Albornoz.
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Hucker.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Brown. Now we have run out of other categories. So item 13 is the miscellaneous business. This is the consideration of the county executive's veto of Bill 3820, taxation, development impact taxes for transportation and public school improvements amendments. Mr. Drummer? Let me recognize. Go ahead. Let me recognize the judge, if you don't mind, Councilmember Reamer.
Sure.
Okay. Well, we can have council staff. I wanted to just comment. They're just offering to begin the comments. So why don't I do that? I think the council is and should be proud of the work that we did on this year's growth and infrastructure policy. It was one of the most significant rewrites of that policy in a generation. And I think there was really strong views here at the council that we have to think differently and act differently about the trajectory, that there's a lot that's going right with the county, but there's some changes that need to be made. And there's a history of policies that have been holding us back. And as we hope to have a good share of our economy accelerating coming out of this situation, this COVID crisis that we're in, it's not going to accelerate if we don't make some big changes. And certainly one of those is in the area of impact taxes. And it's unfortunate the executive chose to veto this bill despite its 9-0 council vote. But we looked very comprehensively at revenue in forming this legislation. And we today introduced the utilization premium payment, which is a companion to the impact tax proposal. The goal of our impact tax law that we passed was to charge appropriate taxes, not to overcharge, but to charge the cost of a student. And by doing, ironically, we're actually right-sizing them. Our impact taxes have been an outlier in the region. They have been many magnitude higher than our competitor jurisdictions. And I certainly think that has had a big effect on our housing market, the amount of supply coming into the market, and then that in turn affecting the cost of living in the county, the cost of whether it's renting or buying a house. However you want to look at it, it's more expensive when your market is really constrained. Not to say that new development is the answer to everything, but it is absolutely an important part of the puzzle. So the legislation that we passed, promotes economic competitiveness, and when you put it together with the other provisions of our infrastructure policy and the growth policy, I think it is a really dramatic step forward. So. Regret the executive vetoed it, but wanted to certainly. I know many colleagues. I know many of us feel the same about this, and others will perhaps comment on it. But just wanted to make a motion that we vote to override.
Second.
Councilmember Novato.
Thank you very much. I was glad to second this motion. Obviously, a lot has been said already because we had very robust deliberations regarding this particular issue and the comprehensive nature of the growth and infrastructure policy, really wanting to be more visionary. And to me, that's what this vote is about. It's about thinking through how we're positioning ourselves, especially now with this issue of a pandemic that was just so unprecedented. I think last year when we adopted the economic development platform and really worked hard to look at those quadrants, especially housing, transportation, these issues are so important. The idea was to position ourselves and really looking forward. And now more than ever, we have to be very bold because the economic recovery will need to be something that we take very seriously, would need to be something where we're going to have to be very aggressive. All of these amazing things that we always want to fund, we're not going to be able to fund them unless we look at how we're going to promote economic development, how we're going to bring jobs to every corner of this county, and how we're going to stimulate our economy. Housing is really critical, and how we position all of these particular pieces of this puzzle will determine whether we succeed or not. And so to me, that's why it is important that we take this vote and why it is important that we continue to be very attentive to this notion of economic development as a important, very critical component of many of our progressive policies. Again, if we're going to be serious about, racial equity and social justice, economic development is critical because it is about opportunities. And so for me, that's why this is a very important moment for us to once again be on record stating that this is central to our work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you, Mr. President. I made very clear when we took these initial rounds of votes that I think we missed the mark on this policy, but we did vote. And we made our decision, and we can review it at any time, and especially on these bills like impact taxes. I don't necessarily think this was agree with the premise behind how we lowered these and haven't filled the gap in revenue. But hey, we did it, and we're going to have to see how that goes and make other decisions that hopefully improve the situation. We talked about a whole set of bills that are introduced today. I have proposals today to help with the housing issue. So I will be supporting the override, but I just wanted to mention that I think altogether we're going to have to revisit this and probably sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to colleagues, particularly the Joint Committee chairs, for all of their work throughout this process and for their comments. I'm, disappointed, but certainly not surprised, unfortunately, that the county executive has once again rejected a tangible step to encourage new transit-focused housing. And we heard earlier today from the county executive's own top economists in the Department of Finance that the issue is the low supply of housing. That's a direct quote from Mr. Platt earlier today in the fiscal forecast, which shows some real serious challenges. And unfortunately, the county executive ignores the numbers and his own experts with a dogmatic approach to housing, which is extraordinarily outdated. The veto had not only the inclusion of financial forecasts that are not and were clearly not based on reality. They were put in place as an apples to apples comparison, and there were caveats in the backup information that it was based on the pipeline data, which never has and never will be built, but it has been used as was in the previous veto as a way to create talking points and to gin people up. But the bottom line is I'm extremely proud of this policy. I think we have done tremendous work. This growth and infrastructure policy is supported by data. It will make our county more welcoming to new residents, more attractive to new businesses, and far more competitive in the region. It will help us to fulfill with results the rhetoric that we keep talking about in terms of our housing, our environmental, and our economic development goals. And despite the vetoes and the pushback that we are receiving from the county executive, this is absolutely the right step forward. It's a significant step in the right direction for Montgomery County. It is not a solution to every one of our problems, but there are a number of solutions in here to a lot of our problems. And I am very much looking forward to overriding this veto and to seeing the benefits to a welcome sign where we used to have a wall for new residents, new businesses, and new investment in Montgomery County.
Thank you, Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. This policy, I think, will pave the way for more fair and equitable growth across Montgomery County. And while I didn't support every component and was the lone dissenting vote on areas where I disagreed, I do believe that on the whole, this policy does reflect our values of inclusivity and diversity. And it's a legislative process. And I appreciate all the hard work that my colleagues undertook in the 17 or 18. I'm looking at you, Councilmember Friedson. I can't get the numbers right. 19. Well, now including this.
The final vote. This is lucky number 20.
Okay, lucky number 20. In nearly 20 conversations, we landed here, and I think ultimately it will help with making Montgomery County a better place to live for current and future residents. I yield back.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you, and I'll be brief. I just wanted to say again that I think that this represents compromise, but it also represents us having an envisioning of a direction that we want to continue to go in to make sure that we're delivering on all those things that we know are important to this community. Good quality schools, great neighborhoods, and an opportunity to live and work and play in one of the best areas in this nation. That's something that we don't want to hold to just a few. We want to make sure that that opportunity is there for a multitude of different people, whether they're coming from different countries or coming homegrown right here from in Montgomery County. And so, you know, I hate to be the 30,000 foot view person on this, but it really is one in which, not getting into the details, but just talking about what this means and what this signals overall. It signals that we're a welcoming community that cares about all the things that once people get here, they count on, and that we're going to try and deliver to make sure that that happens regardless of where you live, regardless of how much money you've got in your pocket, regardless of who you love, what you look like, all those kinds of things. And it's really important. And so it's a great message. And so I think that, again, for us, it certainly is encompassed in this new subdivision staging policy a la growth and infrastructure policy transmorph that certainly is going to continue to feed the next round of councils as you go on to make sure that that's sustainable, and folks like me who will continue to live here, who will depend on this in making sure that you continue to deliver. So thank you guys very much.
Okay, Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much. I'm going to associate myself with much of what has been said already. You know, it's the easiest thing to do is to say no. That's the easiest thing to do. You work through all this. You 20 times or whatever Andrew is keeping score on this has said that we've had of these various discussions. And of the various discussions, how many discussions did we have in those? I mean, you scratched your head, you went back and forth, you thought that something was great, you thought something wasn't so great, but you compromised. And that's what this is all about. Is this perfect? No. Have we ever had perfect legislation? It's probably very few that we have, if we've had any. But this is not something that we should now say, you know what, we're going to start over. That's not what we should be doing. I am going to support overriding the veto. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Albornoz.
Thank you, Councilmember Hucker. I think everything's pretty much been said. I just want to add two things really quick. One, reinforce my appreciation to colleagues and staff and the planning board and everybody that worked tirelessly on this initiative over the last year. There's no question, as everyone has indicated, there's not universal agreement on every issue, but there's consensus. And on the whole, I think this certainly advances us and moves us forward and does take some chances because, quite frankly, we need to in a number of areas to ensure that we increase our housing opportunities, but also enhance economic development. But my last message is to the county executive. I understand that there is a disagreement fundamentally with some, if not most, of the approaches that are taking in this plan. But there is agreement. And I think it's important for the legislative and executive branch to be able to work cohesively and collaboratively on the areas in which there is agreement. And there are areas of agreement. And so each one of us have an opportunity to meet privately with the county executive to discuss issues that are important to us and him discuss issues that are important to him. And our most recent conversation was specifically about this veto. And I appreciated the dialogue and discourse that we had, and I think presents a good model in a productive way for us to work collaboratively moving forward. And I hope that that will be the case, because we have to work collaboratively to address these unbelievably complex issues that are going to require a full court press from every angle of county government and sister county agencies to be able to address. And so while I understand this is symbolic in some ways to veto, acknowledging that this already had unanimous support of the council, let's have more productive conversations about this and so many other issues moving forward so that we can really move this county forward. Thank you.
Thank you. No further comments. I believe we need a motion to override the veto.
Yes, you need a motion. I think you already had a motion.
I think we did. I seconded. Yeah.
But it's a roll call. It is a roll call vote.
Yes.
I just wanted to add that because of the bill was not expedited and it was enacted back in November 16th with an effective date of February 26th, there'll be a new effective date of March 9th, because it's 91, the 91st day after today. So if you'd like to, if the council desired to go back to the February 26th date, you can't do it today. It's not in front of you. We would have to introduce a separate expedited bill to change the effective date in January, which is not complicated, but I just wanted to let you know that that may be coming to coordinate with the dates that we've already set for the effective date for the impact tax rates and when you get to it right after this, I believe the utilization premium payments, which this bill authorizes, are set to take effect, I believe, on February 26th. But that's not, I just wanted to let you know, I didn't want you to be surprised in the future. But this is all you can do today is either override it or not. And if you override it, the new effective date is March 9th. If you want to change that, it requires separate legislation, which can be done in January.
Which we don't have before us. Okay.
Right.
So we have a motion from Councilmember Reamer, a second from Councilmember Navarro. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Glass.
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Tawando. Mr. Tawando votes yes. Mr. Reamer.
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Navarro.
Yes.
Mr. Navarro votes yes. Mr. Rice.
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson.
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Mr. Albornoz.
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Hucker.
Yes. Okay, that is unanimous. So Bob, how do we instruct you to draft such legislation for January? If that's the will of the body.
You could ask me now, and I will have it ready for you when you get back.
I think we're requesting that. I'm seeing heads nod. Okay, terrific.
Not a problem, and it would be introduced on behalf of the council, I guess.
Yes.
Okay, sure. Got it.
Thank you so much, Bob. Okay, now we are rushing on to item 14, action to, which is a resolution to establish the utilization premium payment rates for public school improvements. Is Dr. Orland commenting on this, or Mr. Dunn, or Ms. Dunn?
I'm here. These are really the rates that you approved in the work session. You've already had the public hearing earlier in the day, and the reason why the action was postponed until now was because until a few minutes ago, the utilization payments were not in law. I mean, they have been in law when you passed the bill, but then when it was vetoed, it was no longer in a law. Now it's in law again, so now it's appropriate to go ahead and approve them. But these are exactly the same rates that you approved during the work sessions.
Well said. Now they're authorized, and we introduced this as item 9 earlier today.
Right. You had the public hearing on it. I think it was introduced actually a couple weeks ago.
Oh, beg your pardon. Right. Okay. So we need a motion to approve the resolution.
So
moved. Second.
Councilmember Rice moves, and Councilmember Friedson seconds. All those in favor of the resolution, please raise your hand. That appears to be unanimous. Terrific. Okay. Ms. Dr. Orland, Mr. Dunn, Mr. Drummer, or Ms. Michelson, is there any further business for this body?
Until 6:30.
Right.
Temporarily. No, okay. Hearing none. We stand adjourned until 6:30 for the interviews for the Commission on Redistricting. Thank you, colleagues.